I will call the meeting to order, and I have 10:08. I'll go ahead and take the roll here. Andrew Bowden,
Present.
Pamela Brief,
Present.
Susan Landry,
Present.
and Patricia Trouth.
Present.
Okay, and John Roshinsky is here. We have a full quorum. I want to thank everybody for attending the meeting today. I'd like to put a special welcome to Pamela Brief, our newest committee member, and we'll ask Trish to provide a brief introduction to her.
Sure. So I'd like to welcome our newest member, Pamela Brief. She was appointed by the governor on October 22nd. Her term expires June 1st of 2024. A little bit about Pamela. She is a current president, founder of Pamela Studios, where her primary work is focused in Southern California. She holds a bachelor's of science degree in landscape architecture with a minor in business from Ohio State University. She's worked at POD, located in Santa Ana, Emmett L. Wimple and Associates in Costa Mesa, and as an Imagineer in France on the Disneyland Paris Park. She's also recently ended her 2-year term as president of the American Society of Landscape Architects, Southern California chapter in November. And she's currently, she volunteers her time on pro bono initiatives and serves on the guidance committee for the UCLA Landscape Architecture Extension Program. So welcome, Pamela.
Thank you very much. Very honored to be here.
All right, thank you for that. This meeting is being webcast today pursuant to the provisions of Governor Gavin Newsom's Executive Order N-2920 dated March 17, 2020. A physical meeting location is not being provided. Participants watching the webcast will only be able to observe the meeting. Anyone interested in actually participating in the meeting must join the WebEx meeting. Information and instructions to join are attached to the agenda posted on the LATC website. Committee members, please keep your microphones muted when you are not speaking. Members should keep their camera on during the meeting. When you wish to speak, please use the raise hand feature or physically raise your hand on the video. When speaking, please identify yourself each time. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to Tian Fang, the California Architects Board President, who is attending our meeting today as well. For the LATC voting, all motions and seconds will be repeated for the record, and votes on all motions will be taken by roll call.
Hi, Chair Roshinsky. I just want to let you know that I will be logged off for 1 hour between 11 and noon for another meeting. Okay? And by the way, for new member, Pamela, welcome. I'm a member of as introduced, the Architects Board and a liaison members to this committee. So I sit in the meeting quite often.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Sometime around noon, we'll discuss taking a brief break at that point in time. And also, if anyone needs to excuse themselves briefly from the meeting any other time, please do so. And at this point in time, I'd like to ask any of the other committee members if they have anything that they would like to bring to the committee or to the meeting to do so. Patricia?
Yes, let's see, I will have to briefly leave the meeting also from 11 to 12 noon.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. At this point in time, I would like to ask if there's anyone in the public that would have anything that they would like to bring.
Excuse me, John,
Yes?
you keep cutting in and out. I didn't hear most of what you just said. Is it on my end or on the other end?
I'm not sure. How's everybody else hearing me?
We
I'm
can
not
hear
having any
John
issue.
well.
I can hear.
No issues.
I'm fine.
Can hear just fine.
Okay.
So I don't know what's wrong. I'm getting like every 10th word or something.
It may be your connection, Susan.
Okay, let me figure out what I'm doing then.
This is the moderator, and Mr. Chair, I'm hearing you fine as well. So Susan, one option would be to call in for your audio. So you can use the computer to watch the meeting, but use your phone for the audio. And to do that, you would just go up to the top of your screen where it says audio and video and choose to switch your audio options. And then there's a call-in number and directions.
All right. At this time, I'd like to ask if anyone in the public would like to address the committee for items not on the agenda. And if doing so, identify oneself is voluntary. At this time, I will open the meeting for public comment on any items not on the agenda. Moderator, please open the meeting for public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the moderator, and I have opened up the question and answer panel. So if any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type "I would like to make a comment" in the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. If you're not seeing the Q&A panel, go ahead and click on the question mark within a square at the bottom middle of your screen, and we are displaying instructions for your reference. All right, this is the moderator, and I'm seeing no requests for public comment at this time. Mr. Chair, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's been closed.
Okay, we'll move on to item D, update on the Department of Consumer Affairs, and we have Mary Catherine Cruz Jones. If you could please share your information.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Good morning, committee members. I am Mary Kate Cruz Jones from Board and Bureau Relations at the Department of Consumer Affairs. Thank you for inviting me today to provide a department update to the committee. First, I would like to welcome Pamela Brief as the newest member of the committee. Congratulations on your appointment, and thank you for your willingness to serve. One of our top priorities in Board and Bureau Relations is appointments, and I would like to provide a brief overview. The Landscape Architects Technical Committee has 5 committee members, all of which are licensees. 3 appointments are made by the governor, and the Senate and Rules Committee, as well as the Speaker of the Assembly, each appoint 1 member. We are proud to say that currently the committee has no vacancies. Our work continues even through COVID-19, and the way we do business is changed now, and it will be in the future as well. After temporary closures in March due to state and local stay-at-home orders to prevent the spread of COVID-19, DCA offices remain open with preventative measures to safeguard the health and safety of our employees and our visitors. DCA continues to partner with the Governor's Office and Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency on statewide efforts related to awareness and to the enforcement of public health measures. The economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and the unprecedented wildfire activities are expected to last for several years. The state needs to take immediate action to reduce costs and maximize efficiencies to support all Californians. In April, DCA and all boards and bureaus worked to limit expenditures and hiring to only those necessary to support core functions and emergency response activities. Additionally, DCA learned in late November that the department and each board and bureau will be required to plan for a 5% permanent budget reduction no later than fiscal year 21-22. DCA immediately began working with the committee staff to identify a plan that will best fit operational needs. DCA would like to thank committee staff for your continued support despite these challenges. Lastly, I would like to update you on some of the work of Board and Bureau Relations and what we're doing to support the committee's executive team, along with all Board and Bureau leaders. Board and Bureau Relations has put on 3 virtual brown bag trainings this fall to provide executive officers with the opportunity to learn and discuss best practices on topics such as appointments, managing staff remotely, and providing ADA-compliant meeting materials to committee members and the public. In partnership with DCA's Solid Training Unit, board member orientations have been held quarterly as remote sessions, and Board and Bureau Relations hopes to release the 2021 date soon. Additionally, Board and Bureau Relations hopes to launch a new training for presidents and chairs in the new year. I look forward to the day that we can meet in person. However, in the meantime, if you have any questions or need anything from DCA, please do not hesitate to reach out to Board and Bureau Relations. Thank you again for inviting me to your meeting. That concludes my update, and I will hand it back over to your chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, we will move on to item E, review and possible action on September 4, 2020 LATC meeting minutes. I would at this point in time ask any of the committee members if you have any comments on the minutes.
This is Tara Welch. I've got some requested revisions for the committee's consideration.
All right.
So I'm on page 1 under the heading Staff Present. After my name, Tara Welch, comma, insert LATC Council, comma, and then for Karen Halbo, after her name, comma, insert Regulatory Council, comma. And then I've got one more revision on page 6. Third paragraph that begins with Mr. Bowden. Second line, it says concept, comma, fields. Replace fields with felt, F-E-L-T. And then later on that line, it says CLARB's efforts, however. Delete, however. And then on the next line, it says law requires. Insert a comma after requires. These are just clarifying revisions. That's all I've got. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And let's see. All right, hearing no further comments at this point in time, I will ask for a motion to approve the meetings as revised. Do I have a motion?
This is Andrew Bowden. I so move.
Okay, and do we have a second?
I second. Patricia.
Okay. Ms. Landry? Okay. At this point in time, I would like to ask if there are any comments from the public in regards to this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will go ahead and open up the Q&A panel. So if any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type "I would like to make a comment" and send it to all panelists using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We are displaying instructions for your reference, and we'll give you a moment. All right, this is a moderator. I see no request for public comment at this time. Shall I go ahead and close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's been closed.
All right.
This is Trish. I have a question for Tara. Tara, on your edit on page 1, where we are to insert LATC counsel and regulatory counsel, are we also to strike attorney 3, or do we leave that in there?
You leave attorney 3 in there for both.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any additional comments from the committee? All right. Hearing none, I will ask for a roll call vote. Andy, would you like to take that?
I would if I had a list. Hang on a second. Oh, here it is. Okay. Andrew Bowden, aye. Pamela Brief,
Question for you. Do I need to recuse myself since I was not present at the meeting?
You could abstain.
Oh, I abstain. Thank you.
Susan Landry, we'll have to come back to Susan. Patricia Trouth
Approved.
and John Roshinsky.
Yes.
And coming back to Susan Landry.
This is a moderator. I see we have a call-in user 3. I'm going to unmute call-in user 3 and see if that might be Susan.
Okay.
Susan, are you there on the line?
Yes,
Okay.
my audio on my iPad's not working, so I'm on my phone.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So I say aye.
Aye. Okay. Mr. Chair, we have 4 members voting aye and 1 abstention.
All right. Thank you very much. It passes. We'll move on to item F, Program Manager's Report, and ask Ms. Rodriguez to share that information with us.
Thank you. This is Trish. I wanted to first start with the announcement of Assistant Executive Officer Vicki Bayer's retirement at the end of October. Vicki started her state service career in July of '76, and she has served as the Assistant Executive Officer with the board since January of '94, so approximately 36 years with us. I personally worked under her supervision for more than 10 years and have learned a lot over the years. She was dedicated to her job, and the board and LATC appreciate her years of service. Next, I'm going to move to some updates to our regulations within the Program Manager's Report. I'd like to let everyone know that on November 2nd, I requested assistance from the department with expediting the internal review of pending LATC regulatory packages. In response, DCA Legal prepared an estimated regulatory timeline, including normal and expedited timelines. These target dates have been reviewed weekly with the Regulatory Council and are included as part of the update for the following packages. Section 2611, abandonment of application, 2611.5, retention of candidate files, and 2616, application for licensure following examination. Staff have been working with council to finalize the edits to this package. The next step in the preview process will be to obtain budget official review. An estimated date of completion for budget review is mid-December. The next one, Section 2615, form of examinations, and 2620, education and training credits. This rulemaking file is prioritized at the top of other rulemaking files. The regulation package was submitted to agency for review on November 18th. The next step will be submission to the Office of Administrative Law for initial notice. And on the requirements for an approved extension certificate program, Section 2620.5, this rulemaking package is currently with Legal for pre-review. Staff submitted edits to the regulatory package to DCA Legal on November 20th. The next step will be to forward the package to budget for official review, which has a target completion date of the official budget review by the end of December. Section 2655, substantial relationship criteria, and 2656, criteria for rehabilitation. The proposed rulemaking would implement Assembly Bill 2138, which aims to reduce barriers to licensure for individuals with a criminal history. This regulation package is at Office of Administrative Law as of June 24th. The proposal included a request for expedited review and will become effective when filed with the Secretary of State. OEL approved VetMed Board's notice of approval of regulatory action for their AB 2138 regulatory proposal on November 19th. LATC's proposals were drafted using the VetMed Board regulations. Therefore, we expect to obtain OEL approval on or before the December 4th deadline. Section 2671, public presentments and advertising requirements. Staff have been working with legal counsel to finalize edits to this package and last submitted edits on November 18th. The next steps will be to submit the budget to the Budget Office for budget official review with a target completion of the budget review on or before December 31st. And then finally, disciplinary guidelines. This package required extensive review and consolidation of proposed edits completed with the assistance of LATC's regulatory counsel. LATC staff are working with counsel to finalize the regulatory package and submit to the Budget Office for official review, also with a target completion date on or before December 31st. That concludes my update. Any questions?
Thank you. And yes, I do have a couple. On page 14, under the BPC section 5659, one question that I had is because this did not go to approval the last legislative session, and there was talk here about having to submit this. Is that going to be a standalone bill or part of the DCA omnibus bill?
Laura, could you answer which proposal will be included in?
Sure. I'm sorry, and I didn't hear the first part of what you're asking, John. This is the, which provision is it you're asking about?
The BPC section 5659.
So we will submit for the omnibus bill, and that is due in January.
Okay, so it'll just be included as a line item in there.
Right. So
Okay.
we'll provide updates as it goes forward.
Okay, and I have another question in regards to the next item. And at the top of page 15, in the paragraph there about the sixth line down, there's licensure to applicants licensed to practice landscape architecture by any U.S. jurisdiction, Canadian province, or Puerto Rico. I'm assuming that U.S. jurisdiction would include the U.S. territories. I'm thinking specifically of Guam, which has professional licensure. Because I wasn't sure if what that was. And also the other question that more specific that I have about this is when we're looking at drafting proposed regulatory language allowing reciprocity, how are we planning on handling practitioners from states that have lost their licensure? And I know in particular the state of Illinois right now is kind of in a limbo where they do not have their licensure has been canceled until such time that they can reintroduce legislation to reenact their Practice Act. So I'm just curious if how that would be handled.
John, I really am not prepared to answer. We haven't had anyone from Illinois apply. So I have to, visit our regs at that time to see what the qualification would be for the individual specifically. But we would definitely work with them to see, if we can get reciprocity for them to become licensed in California. As far as your first question on U.S. jurisdictions, I think we would probably check with CLARB to see who were the member boards with CLARB and work with jurisdictions regarding the U.S. territories that you mentioned.
Mhm. Okay. All right. I think that is everything that I had on that. Any other comments or questions from the committee? Okay. At this point in time, I'd like to ask if there's any comments from the public.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a moderator, and I will open the Q&A panel. So if you would like to make a comment, please type, "I would like to make a comment," using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, and send it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference. All right, this is a moderator, and we have a Stephanie Lanegren that would like to make a comment. So Stephanie, I'll let you know when you're unmuted. And Stephanie, you've been unmuted.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I would like to know when has this already gone to the CAB and been passed? I was looking through the actions and I wasn't quite sure. So is it with OAL? Can you tell me exactly where this is at the moment?
Let's see.
So it says final rulemaking submitted to OAL.
It was submitted to agency for review on November 18th.
Okay, so it's not yet at OAL, am I correct?
Yes, you're correct.
And then will there be a comment part, a participation request during the review of OAL?
There'll be a 45-day comment period.
And will the LATC be sending it out to people on their listserv when that comment period is open, or do I have to?
We definitely will, and we'll post it on our website as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephanie. All right, and that is the end of requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel? All right, so I will go ahead and close the Q&A panel. All right, the Q&A panel is closed.
All right, thank you very much. We will move on to item G, review and discussion of the 2020 legislation, and ask Laura Zuniga to present that item.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry.
I do have a question, though. I mean, there's a lot of information that is here within this previous section. Are we not reviewing any of that, or is it just for information purposes only? And
I'm having trouble here. Can you hear me?
yes.
I was not going to walk through the exam information unless there was something glaring that the members would like to go over. If there's something specifically, Andy, you'd like me to cover, I'm happy to.
It's not that I'm, think that we need to go over every last little detail of things, but I mean, if it's in the packet, I'd at least like it to be included, so that we can just chat about things. I mean, when we start looking at pass rates and fail rates and all that kind of stuff, I mean, obviously it would just be nice to be able to, for us as the committee, to note if we're making improvements or if we're experiencing some difficulties, and then so we can develop some strategies as to what do we do? Because otherwise it's just, okay, well, there it is, it's information. And so I'm not suggesting that we have to spend a lot of time, but if it's in the packet, I think it's worth at least discussing. Same thing with the enforcement program. I mean, if we're doing better on enforcement, that's great. Then we should state that so that everybody, including the public, understands that, maybe enforcement actions are improved. The number of cases have been reduced. Just things like that. I'm sorry if I'm sounding like I'm nitpicking, and I'm not trying to be. I'm just suggesting that, if it's coming before the committee should at least discuss it. So, unless the other committee members feel differently.
Well, Andy, I can tell you that in the section of the meeting today where we will be discussing the occupational analysis, I did have several questions that I planned on bringing up, addressing how that analysis relates back to the sections of the exam and some of the results that we're seeing. So I was reserving my comments specifically on that until that point in time.
I have one comment. I was looking at the California supplemental exam, and I thought it was rather interesting. It's a pretty high statistic to have 80% of people that take it the first time, they pass it. So, interesting observation.
So if we're looking at this information, it's just be good to know whether or not we're doing better than we have in the past, or if we're doing worse than what we've done in the past. So I don't know if we can, if we need to spend any detailed time discussing that, but when you look at the areas that we do well in and the areas that we don't, and when I say we, when I say we, I'm saying California. So I'm trying to look here for specifics. So on page 23, the national pass rates for LAIR sections taken during August 1st through September 19th. So it looks like we're doing better. So that's good. It looks like we still have some work to do on design. That seems to be where we're, at least this go around, where we're not doing as well as we could be doing. So, but again, the point of bringing this stuff up is to, again, just try to keep track of how California candidates are doing compared to national candidates. So there's always been a disparity, and it's just good to know, what we're doing right, what we could be improving on. So anyway, enough said.
Andy, this is Laura. Trish is having some technical difficulties. Would it be okay if we move to the next item, legislation? I'll do that, and then Trish can fix her problem. Then we can come back to this item, and maybe you can have a little bit more discussion on how you'd like to present it for future meetings, and then for what items you'd like to go over at this meeting.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right, Laura.
Okay, so we have 3 items for today. The first is AB 2113 by Assemblymember Lowe. So these are all bills that have been signed by the governor, as the legislature has done for the year, and the governor's done with his bill signing period. So this bill requires boards within the Department of Consumer Affairs to assist and expedite applications from individuals that are refugees. So they would have, or have been granted asylum, or have a special immigrant visa. So there's specific categories that are defined in federal law. The LATC has already made the changes to its forms to reflect this new requirement, and they will be in place shortly. So we don't expect it to affect a significant number of applicants, but It will take effect on January 1st. Are there any questions?
Now, I guess my only question is, this is just being enacted now, so we don't know how many people have applied under this. at
We
this
don't
point in
know.
time.
Yeah, I don't think there was a lot of good information about how many people might apply under this. So I think, we'll definitely track it and report to the legislature and to the members as to how many we get.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Laura, this is Jan.
Yes.
More general question, if we don't have information, it's okay. What is our regulation in terms of foreign architects or the people who are here, not necessarily permanent residents, but they are here for a long time, for example? What is the regulation? Can they take exams? California exams?
You mean, do they need to be a citizen to get the license or not? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, architecture license, for example. I never know there's any rules that the license or the applicant has to be green card holders or has to be citizens or has any regulations on that end?
Applicants need to submit either a social security number or I think a taxpayer identification number. I can't remember the exact wording on that. So it is possible for someone who doesn't have a social security number to become a licensee if they have the alternative type of federal identification number.
No, you can have social security number by not being a permanent resident.
I don't know the answer to that question. I would have to do a little bit of research.
Yeah, can we look into that? Yeah.
Sure.
We can talk about that at our board, but
Okay.
it will be interesting to know. Yeah.
All right. I will do some research. I'll send it out to the LATC members as well, since it came up here. Okay. So the next item is SB 878 by Senator Jones. This bill requires all the boards within the department to report their average processing timeframes for initial and renewal licenses and to post it online. So the department is working on implementation for all of the boards, which will be very helpful. LATC, I think, in the meantime, because it doesn't take effect until July 1, they'll see if they can post this information sooner than that date. It's a useful measurement to have, so it'll be good for everyone to have that information online. Are there any questions on that item?
I just have
Yeah.
one really quick question. Now that people can renew their licenses online, if they do that and make payment, how long does it typically take for that to be enacted, or is it simultaneous?
Oh, does it update the same day? That's a good question. I'm not sure how it works for LATC. Trish, are you able to answer that question? Or Stacy?
24 hours, Stacy. I can, 24 hours.
Okay, that's pretty quick. All right, thank you.
Okay, so the last is SB 1474. This was the omnibus bill for boards within the Department of Consumer Affairs. It did not end up having any provisions for LATC. It did at one point contain the language to allow LATC to implement the fingerprint requirement that the board's implementing January 1 of next year. So actually the bill does, it delays the implementation of fingerprinting for LATC for an additional year. Department of Justice had some concerns about the implementation language, even though it's what the board has in statute and what a lot of the other boards have. So we'll work with DOJ in the interim to resolve the issues and see what language we need, and then we'll submit it for omnibus next year. Any questions on this item?
Any questions? All right, at this point, I'd like to ask, is there anyone in the public that has any questions on this item?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the moderator, and I have opened up the Q&A panel. So if anyone would like to make a comment, please type, "I would like to make a comment," and submit it to all panelists using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. And we have Stephanie Landrigan, who has a comment. So Stephanie, I'll let you know when you're unmuted. Stephanie, you've been unmuted.
Thank you very much. So I'm actually looking at the omnibus bill, and my question is, it does appear that item number 2, it's on page 2, where it says existing law establishes the landscape architects technical committee to assist CAB examining candidates for a landscape architect's license. It says that it will. So are you saying this has been struck in the newer version of the bill, or is it still within the bill? That's the confusion I have.
Okay, sure. This is the final version of the bill. So if you look at 2, that summarizes what existing law does. And then the next paragraph before the 3 says it revises the date on which the requirement becomes effective to January 1, 2022.
Okay. Thank you very much for that clarification.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie. And our next request for public comment is from Tracy Morgan Hollingsworth. So Tracy, you've been unmuted.
I just wanted to add one more bill to your list that I think you may have been watching, and that is the California Council of ASLA lobbied heavily to make sure that landscape architects were put into the exempt category. In other words, that they could be independent contractors. That was AB 2257. And we successfully lobbied the author, Assemblywoman Gonzalez's office, to include landscape architects. We said, well, hey, architects are exempt. Why are landscape architects not exempt? Her staff person brought that to her. And then in the next version of the bill, landscape architects were included. So I just wanted to point that out. I think that was a good finish line for us because a lot of people have been concerned about that AB 5, which is the bill that did make a lot of professions not able to categorize themselves as independent contractors. That's all I wanted to point out.
Thank you, Tracy. All right, and that is the end of our request for public comment. Would you like me to go ahead and close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay. It's been closed.
All right, thank you. At this point, I would like to go back to the previous item F, and ask Andy, do you have any additional comments or questions that you'd like to bring to Trish at this point in time?
No, just the general comment that I think that these future meetings, that information that is brought forward or brought to the commission should be gone through, not just passed over. So, I mean, if we don't have any comments, regarding it, then that's fine. But I don't think it should just be skimmed over and just be pushed off to the side. So, I mean, I'd like to know what's going on with enforcement. I'd like to know what's going on with the pass rates. So it doesn't need to be done now, not necessarily this meeting, but in future meetings, maybe if we could make sure that within the program manager's report, that a little bit of time is dedicated to being able to get information.
Yeah, we can certainly do that, Andy. I'll just let you know in the very beginning of our section of the report under committee, that item was already covered in the beginning, introducing Pam as our new member. We typically include under social media the number of followers that we have. And then under the website, we'll be having an update on that in our strategic planning portion under section 11. We'll talk about the videos that we've been working on that will be posted to our website. And then as far as the pass rates go, the one thing that I'll note is our June LAIR exam was postponed due to COVID, and it was held between August 1st and September 19th. Aside from that, the number of candidates that took the August and September administration was a little more just because of the postponement of the exam. But we can certainly review the pass rates if you'd like. I don't know, Stacy, is there anything under enforcement you wanted to highlight for Andy? If not, we'll be sure to go over that next time, Andy.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Andy. I did have one additional question, and it's in regards to the chart following page 20, the chart showing status of pending regulations. One question that I have is when any of these actions are sent to a particular section of DCA, is there typically a deadline that's established on when the expectation is that the action will be completed?
I would say that previously there wasn't, at least not that I was aware of, maybe internally within the legal office. However, since my, I've been communicating more closely with them with a specific request for assistance, we have identified target dates for each of these.
Okay. Yeah, because it seems to me that once it goes into the system, it kind of goes into the cloud and you have no idea when it's going to come back out again. And it would be nice to know what the expectation is on the turnaround on these.
Sure, I've included the next steps during my update of this. I could attempt to go out maybe 2 steps to see what potential dates will be that I could include for my update next time. If that's something that I'm able to do, I'll try.
Okay, that would be appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any further questions, Susan?
Yes, thank you. Under enforcement, in our meeting minutes, we talked about the way some of these websites list people, and there was a discussion of the default was landscape architect, and there was nothing like landscape designer. And I wanted to know if there was any further action on that topic.
This was referring to the minutes, Susan?
Well, in our previous meeting, we had a discussion about people advertising as landscape architects only because on something like LinkedIn, it didn't give them a choice of what else to put down. And we had a discussion of how do we proceed forward to try to get that clarified. It's referenced in the meeting minutes. So I didn't know if there's been if we've done anything about that, have reached out to groups like LinkedIn or House.
We did extensive outreach, correspondence. I believe during our meeting discussion, legal counsel advised that we don't have authority over those websites, and only the individual who is licensed. And so there's really not much more we can do in terms of how they list their categories on their websites.
But I thought our conversation was around kind of something similar to false advertising, that the websites are basically allowing someone to state they're something that they're not.
Right, but Tara, can you maybe add to it? I think she indicated that we'd have to prove a little more in terms of the intent of what they are doing. So again, I don't believe we have authority over that, and if there's anything further that we're able to do.
That's correct, Trish. So we have authority over licensees, and to the extent the licensee is advertising themselves in a bio posted online that they have control over, that they are writing, we can take action against, or rather an unlicensed person who's doing that. We can cite the unlicensed person, but going after a website for content that they are posting on their website, which may be content that is automatically generated by the website itself, we don't have any control over that. So we can't, cite a website for someone's advertisement. We can only go after the individual who is posting the advertisement. Does that help, Susan?
So if I go on LinkedIn and it asks me what category I fit under and I check, there's no other choice but to check landscape architect. It's on each of individual person that you would have to file an allegation against, and you can't say to the website you need to add more categories or the person has to list under other. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. That's a bummer. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments, questions? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to item H, discussion and possible action on the committee's annual budget. And I'll ask Mr. McDermott, Paul McDermott, to present this agenda item.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul McDermott. I am the budget analyst for Landscapes Architects. I've been the analyst now going on my third year, and I want to just go over several things that we've talked about with the budget. What you're going to see today is the year-end budget from last year.
So you're going to let me use this?
Yeah. As we ended the year. I'm working on another budget, which is going to be the current year, which is not part of the package. And then,
But then do I have to put my camera,
and then what we need to do is also discuss what was brought up in the previous presentation on a 5% reduction on a future budget. So what you see in front of you, you have three documents. You'll have an expenditure document, you'll have a fund condition document, and both those documents now are combined on a Word document. I don't know if can you bring up the documents that I'll be looking at? I don't have control to do that.
Hi, this is the moderator. So are you, what is it exactly you'd like to show?
Let's go to the Word document. It'll say Landscapes Technical Committee with the Landscapes logo on top of it.
Okay, so was that part of the?
That should have been part of the package.
Okay, that we did not load, but let me go ahead and take control real quick, and then I can load that. Sorry about that.
That's all right. While that's loading, I can just verbally walk through what we'll see here in a second. What the document will show is the revenue dollars coming in that were estimated for last year, and then the actual dollars that came in at the end of the year. It'll also show the expenditures of what was expected and the dollars that actually were spent for the year, and then have the difference. So as we're going through it, we had an estimated revenue stream of $875,000. The committee actually brought in $803,000. And that was probably as we shut down the last quarter of the year. That's probably why there's a difference there. I'm not too concerned about that because it's well within a deviation of revenue stream. So we're fine there. And why I'm not too concerned about it is because if I look at the projected spending or what would the appropriated amount, we had an appropriation of 1.082 million, and we spent $879 or $880,000. With that said, we have a savings or a reversion of $202,000 at year end, or about 18% of the allocation. So very strict spending. And as far as the board goes, there was nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that stuck out that I would say, hey, we need to rein in some spending. Trish has done a great job on keeping everything in control. Now, we know that last year, the end of the quarter, shut down several things. The board still operated, but there were some expenditure items that basically went to zero, which helped us with some of the reversion. But for the most part, we stayed on par with what we've done over the last 2 or 3 years. So one thing we talk about is when we look at what's called the fund condition spells out all the revenue streams and then the expenditures. And then at the bottom, it tells us how much we have in reserve. And the committee has, at the end of the year, had about 1.3 million in reserves, or about 13 and a half months. Why is that important? The exact reason of what we've been going through with COVID. If things shut down, what do we have in reserve to pay the bills and keep the board functioning? And we want to say that anywhere from 6 to 12 months is a solid fund. We're at 13 and a half, so we're okay here. Let's see if we got that. I have control of that. I'll just keep going with it. So 6 to 12 months is going to be more of a very solid fund where we're at 13 and a half. So it's always said, if all heck breaks loose, what can we do to survive? And we've got plenty of money in the fund to be able to do that for 13 and a half months. So with the control and spending, with the fund in solid condition, with the reserve, the months in reserves, in a very solid state, I don't see anything that is sticking out that I need to be concerned with. So great job on spending and great job on the money is charged with. Second item that I'm sorry, does anybody have any questions on that?
Paul, this is Laura. I actually don't have any questions, but Trish has rejoined. If she could be made a panelist, she's in the attendee list. Thank you.
Okay. Now, the other thing that I want to address is, as Trish and I have been talking, we were just tasked with a pretty much a department-wide and a statewide 5% reduction on our budget year budget. We've had our initial conversations and we've earmarked several line items that we're going to reduce our spending by 5%. Every board, every bureau, and every committee is going to be going through a 5% permanent reduction. It's not just next fiscal year, it's going to be a permanent reduction. As Trish and I had gone through all the line items, we've earmarked several things, and we're in good shape. Even with our 13 and a half months and our reversion of about 200,000, we're still in good shape to reach that 5% without putting the board at any jeopardy of overspending their budget or their allocation. So we'll be working on that, and that again, that's for the next fiscal year going on beyond that. And then our current fiscal year, we're still working on the budget there. We have a couple adjustments to do, but that's not going to adjust anything as far as I'm concerned. I only have 3 months of data, which aren't conclusive on where we are. But if I look at them, I'm still pleased that it lines up almost exactly as Trish has been spending over the last 3 years. Are there any questions?
Yes, I have a couple questions. Could you point out the line items that you're looking at reducing?
Yeah, do you see the documents at all? All I see is the item H on my screen.
Yes.
All right, so on the documents, the first thing we looked at was If you look down at 53404 and 405 CMP external, those are contracts that we have. We have a decent amount of money in those contracts, which is above and beyond what is normally spent by the board. The next one we looked at was general expenses. And the third one was going to be IT, information technology, and consolidated data centers. What we originally thought of is we could take a chunk of the reductions out of one line item, and I didn't want to do that because I don't know what the future is going to bring. I would like to take some out of a little bit out of a few of them. So if the budget just does change, we're not shorting ourselves on any one line item. The one thing we could not change was facilities, because rent is the way rent is. And the pro rata, which is the process of managing the budget and IT and legal and everything else, some of the legal status, we weren't able to adjust that. So we're looking at those four: general expenses, CMP external, consolidated data, information technology. The one I did not want to touch was travel. I know travel is down, but as we come back online, hopefully sooner than later, travel will pick back up again, and I don't want to short travel until we know exactly what we're going to do.
Okay, because one question that I had is how are the unused funds or the allocations handled? In other words, travel would be an excellent example, that there's a line item in the budget and there's funds assigned to that, but if those are not being used, do those funds just go into reserve, or are they lost for that fiscal year?
No, that's a good question. So the way it works is we would do what's called bottom line budgeting. So in the case of travel, we have money there, but we spent, for in-state travel, we had a budget of $14,000. We spent $5,000. So we've got money left over. That money goes down to the bottom into the pool, and we have a $202,000 reversion. That money is then moved into the fund condition. So you don't lose the money. It gets reverted, or it's a savings, which is now part of your fund condition. So it's not a use it or lose it scenario. You still have it. It then goes into any future consideration in case there is a situation where we don't have funds come in. We now have that money to use in the future to pay the bills.
Okay. And one last question is, now that we've gone to these virtual meetings, how much is LATC charged for these meetings?
I don't have the answer to that question. I would have to come from Trish.
I mean, I'm assuming that we are being charged to utilize state resources to run these meetings, correct?
Yeah, there's going to be that money involved. There's going to be any per diem involved. Obviously, the travel is not there, but I will see that after. I'll see the dollar figure after the fact.
All right.
And again, I wouldn't want to reduce that, because as we come back online, remember this is a 5% permanent reduction. As we come back online, hopefully we go back to normal spending. And then what will happen is you'll spend it in the meetings and not in the reversion part, if that makes sense.
All right. Any other questions? All right, Mr.
I have one question.
Okay.
Under in the budget, line 54, special items of expense. Since I am the newbie, could you explain what might fall under that category?
I cleaned this up so that I didn't have 100 line items. So let me.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. Let me go see what it is.
Okay.
I'll expand it on my end. It's a code. I'd have to find out what the code is. Obviously,
Okay.
it's 1077. Is that what you're looking at there?
Yeah, that's the item.
Yeah, Yeah, I'd have to go look that up within our fiscal
Okay,
spreadsheet to find out what that is.
okay. Is that something that I could ask to have reported for the next meeting?
Sure, I can get that. I can get that for you.
That'd be great. Thank you very much, Paul.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I have a question I'd like to ask.
All right.
When we look at the out-of-state travel line for the 2019-2020 budget, there's a 0, but for going over to projections to year end, there's a $3,025 expenditure. Is that something that has already occurred, or is that it's intended to be occurred, and what would it be?
So I handle this. This is year-end numbers for 2019, 2020. So this trip, if I'm correct, was a trip to Washington D.C. for the national meeting. If I'm correct on this, I can't remember.
That's correct.
Okay. So there was no budget to travel. However, the travel did happen, and that's why that's there. And I'm pretty sure as we look at the budget for 2021, we again have 0 budgeted for out-of-state travel.
But which national meeting are we referring to? Because the ASLA national meeting was canceled or went virtual. So there was no face-to-face, annual meeting that I'm aware of.
Andy, I believe that travel was to the CLAR meetings that Trish and I attended last February.
It was a training.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was a CLAR training meeting.
Okay, I'm sorry. I wasn't aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay. So I think it was a year or 2 ago, the state reduced our licensing fee amount. I know for myself, I had several months without work. We're now looking at things potentially getting worse again for several months till the vaccines come out. And is there any consideration of lowering our license renewal fees?
The temporary fee reduction and negative BCP that was put forth was due to LATC's budget approaching the statutory limit. So in an effort to get us down to months in reserve that was at an acceptable amount, those are the steps that we had to take. We reduced initially the license fee for one renewal cycle and then revisited the budget at the end of that period and extended it for another renewal cycle. And at this time, there's no consideration for raising the fees. It did go back from $220 to $400, and we don't anticipate lowering those at this time.
So that didn't come down as a state mandate, that came because we had too much money left in our account?
That's correct.
Okay, has there been any discussion at the state level of the license renewal fees?
No.
Okay, darn it. Darn.
So just to tap in that a little bit, if you remember, I said that we're at 13.5 months of operating expenses or funds and reserves. At the time that reduction hit, I think we were somewhere around 28 months, which was above and beyond an acceptable amount. So that was why the reduction happened in that fee.
Not that I need it, but is there a case where someone could plead hardship for a fee reduction? I'm not specifically for me, but I didn't know how that works for other people. If you're a small self-employed business and didn't have work, is there a provision to ask for a fee reduction?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Paul? Hearing none, I'd like to ask, is there anyone in the public that has any questions or comments on this item? I would ask the moderator to open up.
This is the co-moderator. The Q&A panel has been opened. If you would like to make a public comment, please submit you would like to make a public comment and send to all panelists. We will take these in the order they are received. At this time, we have received no requests for public comment. Would you like me to close this feature?
Yes, please.
Wonderful.
All right. We will then move on to item I, discuss and possible action on the August 2020 occupational analysis of the landscape architecture profession.
Hi, this is Trish Rodriguez. Want to introduce Karen Okasich, Research Data Supervisor from the Office of Professional Exam Services, and Tracy Montez, Chief of DCA Programs and Policy Review Division, to go over our 2020 occupational analysis of the landscape architecture profession. Karen?
Good morning. I believe that we have a slideshow. Can we get that pulled up? Thank you very much. So my name is Karen Okasich, and I am with the Office of Professional Examination Resources. And as Tris had just said, I'm joined today by Dr. Tracy Montez, who is Chief of the Division of Program and Policy Review at the department. And if you are not familiar with the Office of Professional Examination Resources, our unit is part of the Department of Consumer Affairs, and we exist to help all of the licensing boards, bureaus, and committees under DCA's umbrellas develop licensing exams that are legally defensible, valid, and fair. And we're here today to go over the results of a occupational analysis that we recently completed for the landscape architect profession in California. So next slide, please. For programs. And here in California, we have a regulation, it's Business and Professions Code Section 139, that requires that boards submit a report every year about their occupational analysis and exam development processes, and they're required to conduct an occupational analysis on every 5 to 7 years. So in addition to this Business and Professions Code, there are several principles and standards that we use within the testing industry that guide us in how we collect evidence of validity. And there are very specific steps, but one of the overriding principles is that we have to provide evidence that demonstrates that the content of a licensing examination directly reflects the content of practice. So we need to show a link between what is measured on an examination and the competencies that are required for practice. Next slide, please. When we develop licensing exams, our purpose is to identify candidates who are competent to practice safely and differentiate them from those who are not. So we're trying to identify candidates who possess what we refer to as the minimum level of competence necessary to practice safely. So licensure exams must be developed to provide a valid and reliable means of doing this. At the same time, we also need to be fair to candidates. So when we're making decisions about who is legally allowed to practice, we need to make sure that we're focused on measuring the competencies required for entry-level practice that relate to public protection. So we need to ensure that the examinations protect consumers while at the same time not limiting access to occupations. It's a balance between these two goals, and we achieve this balance by working with subject matter experts throughout all phases of our processes. Next slide, please. To determine the critical tasks and knowledge that must be mastered to protect the public at the time of entry into a profession, we conduct an occupational analysis. And the occupational analysis is the first step in what we refer to as the cycle of exam development. So the results of the occupational analysis provide us with a detailed description of practice, and that forms the basis for developing licensing exams. That description of practice and the outline are used in the subsequent steps that we go through, where we work with subject matter experts to write and review test questions, construct exams, and set passing scores. And this process is required for all licensing exams, whether they are state-specific or whether they're with a national exam. Next slide, please. So the main purpose of the occupational analysis is to provide a detailed description of practice that is used to develop a legally defensible document that is a content outline for what is going to be measured on the exam. The results can be used for a number of other purposes as well. It's sometimes used to evaluate licensure requirements. We're also maybe using them to look at training curriculum requirements. And then we sometimes can use them to help boards make distinctions between licensing classifications. Another really important outcome of the occupational analysis is that it helps improve transparency by providing candidates with information about exactly what competencies are required for entry into the profession and what exam content they're going to be assessed on for licensure. Next slide. So there are some basic steps that we go through when we conduct an occupational analysis, and we begin by working with subject matter experts to first identify what are the main duty areas that are involved in performing in practice. We're then working with them to identify what tasks are involved in performing in each of those areas and what knowledge is required in order to perform those tasks safely and competently. And when we're developing these tasks and knowledge statements, we're working with subject matter experts who are representative of practice throughout California. So they are actually licensed practitioners who are actively working. We are, when we're working with them, we are looking at people who work throughout the different regions in California. So we are working with people in Northern California, Southern California, rural areas. We're also making sure that we're working with people who are in different specialty areas and performing different tasks that are associated with the license. And then we're also making sure that we have a representation of different experience levels. The licensing exam measures entry-level competencies, so we want to make sure that that perspective is represented throughout the processes. The task and knowledge statements that end up developed with subject matter experts are then put onto a survey that gets administered to practitioners throughout all of California. And they're asked to rate each statement according to the relative importance to their particular practice. The results of the survey are then taken to another group of subject matter experts who review the survey results and determine a final description of practice. And it's this description of practice that will determine the content that should be measured on an examination. Next slide. So we recently completed the occupational analysis for landscape architect profession in California. And as part of this, we sent an invitation to all landscape architects in California who had an email on file with the board. So the invitation was sent to 3,215 practitioners, and the final sample size included 700 571 responses. So not everybody responded to the survey. And in some instances, the survey may not have been completed enough that we could use it. But ultimately, we had a response rate of about 17.8%. And we typically will have between a 10 and 20% response on occupational analyses. So that was a sufficient response rate in this particular case. Next slide, please. So in discussing the results of the OA, we want to first go over some of the demographics of the respondents so that we can make sure that it was representative of practice. And we're especially focused on those demographics with regard to experience, education, work setting, and geographical location. Next slide. So we had more than half of our respondents reported being in practice as a landscape architect for 20 years or more. 22% reported they had been practicing between 11 and 20 years. About 11% reported they had been practicing for 6 to 10 years. And then about 16% reported they had been practicing for fewer than 5 years. So we definitely had a diverse representation of experience level. Next slide, please. We also asked about the primary work setting of our respondents, and the majority of them, about 60%, indicated they worked in a landscape architectural firm. About 17% indicated they worked in a multidisciplinary firm, and then about 15% indicated they worked in a government agency. Next slide. As part of work settings, we were interested in whether landscape architects predominantly worked by themselves or were in a larger organization. And when we asked this question, about 43% indicated they were the only landscape architect in their primary work setting, with another 43% indicating they were one of less than 10, and only about 15% indicated they worked in a larger organization. Next slide. When asked to describe their highest level of education, 65% had indicated they held a bachelor's degree, and then 30% indicated that they also had a master's degree. And then we had a few respondents that had either a doctorate degree or a certificate or some other form of education. Next slide. We also wanted to ask respondents about the types of projects that they had worked on over the last 2 years to make sure that we had representation of the different types of projects that landscape architects can work on. And respondents were asked to select all that applied. And as you can see, the respondents did indicate that they worked in a variety of different projects. Most respondents had worked on residential projects. About 70% said they had worked on those type of projects. About another 56% had worked on projects related to parks and recreation, and about half had worked on transportation projects. Next slide. As part of that, we were particularly interested in what type of green projects respondents had worked on over the past 2 years, and about 88% reported they had worked on conservation projects, 75% had worked on stormwater management, and 48% had worked on water reuse and recycle projects. And since that was such a big part of practice in California, we were particularly interested in those responses. In addition, respondents had also indicated they worked on projects involving erosion control or slope protection, and about 70% indicated they had worked on permeable paving projects. So if you're interested in more information about the type of projects or any of these demographics, the validation report goes into more depth about the numbers and what was found. So next slide. So we did ask about the type of specialists that landscape architects work with, and the most common response was that they work with arborists. We had about 70% indicate they work with arborists. And then geotechnical engineers and traffic engineers were also specialists that were tended to be worked with. Next slide. And we finally asked about additional certificates that were held by landscape architects in addition to their license. And the most common response was that they held a LEED accreditation professional certificate. And next slide. And this final slide about demographics has to do with the respondent throughout the different regions of California, and we had representation of all different areas. So there were no concerns about over or under representation. Next slide. So now with regard to the main part of the survey and where practitioners rated task and knowledge statements, the landscape architects who completed the survey were asked to rate each of the task statements using 2 scales. They were first asked to rate each task in terms of how frequently they performed it in their practice, and then they were also asked to rate how important each of the tasks was to their the effective performance in their profession. And both of these used a 5-point Likert scale. We combined the data from these 2 scales to develop what we refer to as a criticality index value for each of the task statements. And to do that for each respondent, we multiply their frequency rating times their importance rating, and then we calculate the average of those values across the respondents to get a criticality index. Next slide, please. We also asked practitioners to rate the knowledges that were included on the survey. And we used 1 scale, which was just a knowledge scale, an importance scale. They were asked again on a 5-point scale to rate how important each knowledge was to effective performance in their job. Because there was only the 1 scale, the criticality index for knowledge statements was simply the mean importance rating. Next slide. So once we had analyzed the data, we had an additional workshop with subject matter experts to review the results. And the subject matter experts first looked at the demographic data to make sure that it was representative of practice. And then they reviewed the criticality values for task and knowledge statements. And we were looking to evaluate whether there was a cutoff point at which the values were not high enough that the statement should be retained. So when the subject matter experts looked at the value for the task statements, they determined that they were all important and should be retained. And then they repeated that process for the knowledge statements. And they looked at the values and they retained all of the knowledge statements based on the criticality values. However, there were 2 statements that they determined were subsumed underneath other knowledge statements. So those 2 were eliminated. And again, that information goes into greater detail in the validation report. So after they looked at the values that had been obtained, the criticality indices for the statements, they then performed a confirmation linkage exercise in which they linked each knowledge and task statement together. So basically, every task statement had to have at least 1 knowledge statement and vice versa. After that exercise had been completed, the subject matter experts then organized the tasks into the final content areas, and they developed definitions to form the description of practice. So the next slide, please. So this shows what the outcome of that description of practice was. There were 4 content areas, and there were tasks that were associated with each of them. So the scope of project, that area pertains to performing a site analysis and determining the impact of existing site conditions and characteristics on landscape development projects. And it also deals with identifying applicable regulatory requirements and restrictions that are associated with projects. There were 16 tasks that ended up being put into that content area. The second content area had to do with program development with 4 statements, and that section pertains to developing program elements based on the client's goals and site conditions and constraints, and evaluating the feasibility and viability of the program. The third content area was the design process, and that area pertains to developing and refining design solutions to meet the client and project needs. And it also includes developing specific design solutions to support water, energy, and environmental conservation. And then that final content area was construction documents and administration, and that area pertains to preparing documents that are necessary to execute the landscape design. Next slide, please. So there is a next step that we will undertake as part of this process. and that is to review the content of the national LARI against the current California description of practice. So our understanding is that the national is currently in the process of conducting their occupational analysis, which was delayed, I believe, by the pandemic. My understanding is that they are planning to administer the survey this spring. So once we have the results of their OA, we will work with subject matter experts to take a look at the results of the California specific description of practice and the results of the national occupational analysis to determine whether the competencies that are required for California are adequately covered by the LARI. And we'll also work with subject matter experts to develop a California specific exam outline if it's determined that there remains some competencies that need to be assessed at the California specific level. I know that there were some questions. I just wanted to say that there are some questions about the pass rates on the national examination. That is typically not something that we track on an ongoing basis because we're not involved with that exam, but taking a look at that will be part of this review process that we will do once we have the occupational analysis results. So that is the occupational analysis that we conducted. Do you have any questions?
All right. Anybody on the committee have any questions at this point?
I have comments and questions.
Mm-hmm. All right. Why don't we go to you first, Susan?
I just would like to thank everybody who worked on this. Very informative. A lot of the pie charts were very interesting to show how many of us have been around more than 20 years. Kind of a breakout of how many people work more than 40 hours. And then in the, let's see what page this is on here. On page 53 of the document, the content area for construction documentation and administration. I find it very interesting that prepared drawings to communicate construction, the mean importance was 4.35. And the reason I find this interesting is our landscape exam has no drawings anymore. It's all multiple choice. And our licensing practice and title act has mostly to do with drawings. So this is something that I think I've brought up before. I'm sure the reason it was taken out of the exam had to do with some higher up person or agency saying you can't do that anymore, but I feel it's so important to have people be able to draw drawings and be tested on that. So that's more just of a side note about that. But I thought this was very interesting, very informative, and thank you everybody who put this together.
All right. Pamela, you had a question or a comment?
Yes, thank you, John. Yes, and I second Susan's comment. This was very comprehensive. Thank you so much for preparing this for us to review, and thank you for going through the process. I have a question as far as when you're talking about certifications in here, and just maybe I guess maybe more than a question, maybe something to bring up for you to consider for the next time round that you do such a thing, and that is the site's version 2 accreditation or certification that is available to landscape architects in addition to LEED. It isn't something that's necessarily taken off quite to the extent that I think they had hoped. But it is another designation. So perhaps when there's a questionnaire that goes out again, we might include that.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I've definitely made a note, and we will take a look at that for the next survey.
Okay. Thank you, Karen. And I do have a question as far as the people that we work with. Was there a reason that we did not include civil engineers as people we collaborate with? And I guess maybe just a question to the committee members, if they think that's something that should be added for the next time around, or if we want to just leave it as is. Thank you.
I will respond and just say that when we were developing those particular questions, we had the subject matter experts tell us which of the specialists to include, but I'll make a note of that as well to specifically ask about civil engineers.
That would be great. Thank you.
All right. I have a couple questions. On page 7, it mentioned that 3,215 landscape architects were sent an invitation, and my understanding is that those were the number that we actually had an email address for. Do we know at this point in time the total number of licensees that we have in California?
This is Trish. It's approximately 3,700. It's slightly more than that. So we do have a majority of the email addresses for our licensees. I should note, though, however, it's not required that they provide that at this time. So it's voluntary, and so I think we've done a pretty good job in collecting most of them.
Mm-hmm. And did that 3,215 include licensees via reciprocity? In other words, they're...
Yes, it does.
Okay. Okay. And I had a really quick question in regards to the sample size. I know we ended up with 571, or roughly 17.8% of the sample. In determining which of the respondents to include in the sample size, was there any particular effort made to identify practitioners that were in non-traditional roles that may have unique requirements in regards to their practice?
No, there were no analyses that were conducted to look at the type of specializations that you are referring to. I think, if I'm understanding correctly, we could potentially look at something like that with the data if you have a specific question. We are interested in looking at general practice, and so we are looking across the profession, not necessarily at specific subsets of the profession.
Mm-hmm. All right. And my last question that I have is, you had mentioned that CLARB is currently in the process of doing their occupational analysis, and when that's completed, California will basically look at the results of that and do a comparison with our own occupational analysis. But one question that I had is, when you're looking at knowledge, skills, and abilities that you're essentially examining, what's the criteria that you're using to determine which ones of those may be unique to California that we would be testing for under the supplemental exam?
We will be relying very heavily on the input of subject matter experts. We always defer to what people who are actually practicing in the profession will tell us. So if they indicate that there are California specific requirements, then that will be pulled into the California specific exam.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it basically relies on their input.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
John, I have one more question.
Yes.
Going back to table 9, that's who it works with. I concur about the civil engineer. Thank you, Pamela. I missed that one. I would think that number would be higher than working with Arborist or geotech. The other thing I don't see anywhere in here is working with government agencies, i.e. doing public work versus residential work. That might be something that would be interesting, especially as we get into later on our agenda talking about continuing education. And also about working outside, John's comment about non-traditional roles. For instance, I'm a city council member, but I got elected because of being a landscape architect and my background in public work. So that might be something to ask about non-traditional roles. Thank you.
All right. All right. At this point, if there's no further comments from the committee, I'd ask, are there any members of the public that have questions or comments that they would like to bring to our attention at this point in time?
Okay. This is the moderator. I hope you can hear me. I have opened up the Q&A panel per your request. And we have Stephanie Landrigan who'd like to make a comment. So Stephanie, I'll let you know when I have unmuted you. All right, Stephanie, you've been unmuted.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful, and the report is pretty in-depth. I would like to make a couple of comments and in continuance of the committee members' comments on specialist worked with, which is on your page 18 in the report. I think it would be quite helpful if the question that was asked was included, because, you know, as psychometricians, when you review how you ask a question, it does color the answer, and that would be very helpful for those who were not part of this responding bunch of landscape architects to know what that question was, so we can see why those answers occurred. I was part of it, and I agree there were several things that were not what I would have chosen all the time. So that would be very helpful in some of your tables to know what the question was asked, so we could understand the impetus of the answers. And then on page 51, I'm curious as to, when we get down to the actual content areas and descriptions, I see that there are some modified ones, and I don't think you covered the reason for modifications and validation of that, and several of those modifications are interesting in themselves. I'm trying to get to page 51 right now, which for some reason is not showing up. So when we get to 51, which is down here as content area modifications, you have several of these that have been highlighted and are changed now. On page 48, T2, evaluate topography and geology to determine implications of landform on project development. And then the one that I am going to be most concerned about is on page 51, which is T33, develop measures to mitigate or remove or reclaim environmental impacts associated with site development. So my question to you is, why were they changed? And I do have a problem with T33. I'm actually the landscape architect who sits on the State Mining and Geology Board. And reclamation is one of the duties that landscape architects do perform. There may not be a lot of landscape architects out there doing this. It's a small group, but it is a very important service. And it is in California law that we do reclamation. So can you answer those questions for me, please?
Thank you, Stephanie.
The statements were modified for clarity, and that was done by subject matter experts. I believe that we probably talk about that in the validation report in the description. So it was something that was evaluated by subject matter experts, and they had recommended those changes.
Hi, and this is Tracy Montez, if I can elaborate on that as well. A gentle reminder that these are actually, as Karen said, statements. They're task statements, and the idea is that these are tasks that are performed in a job. And what we start out with is a much bigger picture of what is done in the profession. Then we use the data to whittle down that big scope into what is most critical to assess on a licensing exam. And so that's why you will see some of those task and knowledge statements. They may fall out while others are retained. And throughout the process, through the feedback with our subject matter experts, we may make some modifications on the wording. But again, we try to do this using our methodology in psychometrics. Some of the scales and the statements may appear a little different than what you may use in your field. However, we do this to get a robust and reliable measurement, but we are, again, responsive to our subject matter experts that we utilize in the different workshops, and then we make those changes. And again, we try to detail out that information in the full validation report. Thank you.
This is the moderator, and Stephanie Landegren would like to make a further comment. So, Stephanie?
Thank you. However, we only had 18% who responded, which is actually not a bad response rate. 500 landscape architects, plus or minus, of which, and this in T33, had a 2.98 who said they did it. So, which was maybe partially in relationship to LEED or some of the LEED standards. I question the removal of or reclaim, and what process is there to challenge subject matter experts who may, I don't know how many subject matter experts you had, but if you have 10 or 12 out of 3,000, that's a very small amount, and they may not have a breadth of practice. I have concerns about the modification of certain elements and areas of study based upon such a small number, statistically.
Yes, and we thank you, for your concerns that you've expressed, and we can add that again to our notes so that as we continue doing the examination validation process, which is item writing and so forth, we can monitor to see that if this is a concern. But we don't have an appeal process. We follow the standards. Again, it's a methodological approach. The response rate is defensible. Usually we like to see about 10 to 12%, so you're above that. So we feel very confident, again, with the response rate as well as the number of subject matter experts that were involved in the process. If we ever have concerns about the validity of the data or reliability, we will work with the committee to recruit more subject matter experts or to hold additional workshops. But at this time, we feel very confident with the product that's been produced. Yet we will take all of this feedback that we've heard, and we will continue to use that in the various workshops we have as exams are developed, and certainly for the next cycle of the occupational occupational analysis. As Karen mentioned, we do this about every 5 to 7 years, but if for some reason your committee decides it needs to be done sooner, we can do that. But I do want to congratulate the committee for meeting Business and Professions Code Section 139 mandates, which we do report to the legislature annually. So you are on schedule and you have a robust product, but certainly, as Karen mentioned, this is a cycle. So we are always welcome to take feedback and introduce it and include it in the process of exam development. Thank you.
This is the moderator, and Stephanie would like to make further comments. So Stephanie?
Thank you again. My concern, and maybe you can answer this, is this used as part of our sunset review? Is it disclosed as part of the sunset review? And is it also part of information that legislators may use to decide to change laws because they see that there's a very small percentage of people doing, let's just say, our engineering work or grading, because we do have grading as part of our, scope. Also, if we are doing reclamation and the legislators may say, oh, in redoing the State Mining and Reclamation Act, say, oh, well, it says nowhere in their test, nor do they test for this, that reclamation is done, so we can take it out. So I see it as, if it is going to be used in any legislative concerns and review of what landscape architects do, it can really impact the scope of our practice. And I know that is not something that psychometricians care about, but it certainly is, if we're going to be licensed, it's something we care about. So I think that is a consideration for the committee to discuss. Thank you.
Again, this is Tracy, if I may, real quick, and then Trish, feel free to jump in. This would be one piece of information, but certainly we would not want any significant decisions made about scope solely based on this report. Again, we would ask for additional SME input, as well as hearings and the various processes that your committee follows. So, and we do care about the scope of your practice. That's why we revisit this, on an ongoing basis. But again, it is merely one piece of information in a vast amount of documentation that your committee has. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. This is Trish. I just wanted to add that in relation to Stephanie's question, is this part of the sunset? The last occupational analysis that was conducted in 2014 was included in our sunset report, and I expect this one to also be included in our next sunset report.
All right, this is a moderator. I see no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's been closed.
All right, I do have a couple extra questions. And getting back to Stephanie's question in regards to whether the OA is included in sunset review, that sort of thing, is the occupational analysis at some point officially blessed? And if so, by who? And is there recourse to address specific line items that are in it? I'm just curious what the process would be for that.
This is Trish. I had a conversation with Karen, or I had a question just to clarify if the committee or board needed to approve the report, and that is not required. But I'll let Karen address any questions as far as it sounds like you're inquiring about a process in which to maybe add some additional input to contents of the report, which it sounds like they're taking notes for the next opportunity. But in relationship to this one, Karen, is there anything more you can add to that?
Hi, Trish. It's Tracy. I'll jump in on this one. Boards and committees, bureaus approach this very differently. It's not necessary for you to approve it, but certainly you're welcome to offer any comments. If there's areas that you would like us to follow up on, we're happy to do so, especially as we move forward with the review of the national exam. We can ask some additional questions, get some clarification for you. That's perfectly acceptable. We'll respond accordingly. It's rare for a board or committee or bureau to not accept the findings of a report, typically because we are the ones that would have to defend it and your exam if there was any litigation or allegations about your exam. But we are always happy to further explore and follow up if you have questions.
Okay, because a personal concern is that if this process gets to the point of developing a product that's so general that it basically starts to become questionable whether or not any of our practice is can't be done by anybody, then it sort of brings into the question of licensure to begin with. So I think that it is important to look at those particular tasks that, especially if there's a history that's been there, because I remember at one point, specifically in regards to this term of reclamation and whether landscape architects are qualified to do that if I'm not mistaken, there was either some legislative or regulatory action that was taken to ensure that landscape architects retain that capacity. And so I know at that point in time there was a concerted effort made to make sure that was retained. And that's just as an example. I have another general question. Once the OA is done, what are the next steps in regards to actually working on the California supplemental exam and either modifying that or rewriting it?
So this is Tracy again. And let me, if I may, go back to your initial comment. I want to point out that the exam is intended to measure the most critical competencies during this period of time that the exam plan is valid. So it does not mean that there are other competencies that aren't important. It's just that they may not be practiced as frequently or determined to be as critical to be on the exam plan. So no one should take the exam plan and say, this is the scope. It's merely taking a piece of the scope of practice and saying, this is what we're assessing. So I just want to be really clear that your occupational analysis looks at the entire profession as it is in your scope of practice and then sifts out what at this particular moment in time, this snapshot, and creates an exam plan. As far as next steps, again, we wait for the national exam to be, their occupational analysis to be done. Then Karen and the OPS team will have a group of subject matter experts come in and will evaluate the national exam plan compared to what is practiced in California and again, try to sift out the differences so that we have a unique exam. We don't want to duplicate testing for candidates because we know that that's not fair for them. So we truly want to determine what is unique to California and then create the exam plan based on that. And that is, again, where we can have a further discussion about the concerns that were raised about the tasks that fell out.
Mhm.
Does that help?
Yes, and at this point in time, is there any rough time frame of when that's going to happen? Is it going to be like 2 years from now, 3 years from now?
I think it is next year. I'll defer to Karen. Do you have that date?
The information as to when the national will be complete, we have been given a tentative date that the survey will be administered this spring, but they have not given us a firm deadline as to when they anticipate being finished with the study. But it is something that we will be in communication about.
All right. Thank you. Any further questions from the committee?
Yes.
Susan?
Go ahead. I'd like to follow up a little bit on what Stephanie was talking about under the reclamation, and it brought up something that is going to be upcoming. I would like to know how to add questions for later, especially regarding recycling and waste reduction. There's a upcoming legislation that's going to take effect of 1383 that talks about food composting and having the cities and agencies buy back the composting and use in soil management. So I don't know if that falls under develop measures to mitigate and remediate, maybe not, but recycling and waste reduction is certainly becoming a topic of concern. And when you go back and look at the charts on what people do, water conservation is in there, and that's mostly probably because of the MWELO regulations. So this new thing, it takes effect in 2022 of January. Projects are going to have to start looking more at recycling. I don't know how that's factored into any of this. And I think it also should be considered on any rewrites of our exam. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments or questions? All right, hearing none. It is 12:10, and at this point in time, I would like to ask if the committee would like to take a short break before moving on.
John, one of the recommended action is to review and approve the results. Do we need to take a motion on this?
No, there's no motion needed on this item at this time.
So we don't have to formally approve the results?
No.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to call for a 20-minute break. And let's see, I've got 12:11, so why don't we plan on meeting back at 12:30?
Thank you.
$12:30, and we're reconvening the meeting of the LATC. I'll take a really quick roll call. Andy, I can see you're here. Pamela, Patricia is back with us. And Susan, are you with us?
I'm on my phone for voice and the video. I don't know why I'm not showing up here. Let me see. There we go. I'm on.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll move on to item J. Discuss and possible action on proposed amendments to California Code of Regulations, CCR, Title 16, Division 26, Article 1, Section 2630.2, Appeal of Citations. And I will ask Trish Rodriguez to present this agenda item.
Hi, this is Trish. The board has Business and Professions Code Section 5526.5, which was amended effective January 1st, allowing the respondent of a citation to request a formal administrative hearing after an informal conference if the citation is upheld or modified. This also authorizes the executive officer to appoint a designee to hold an informal conference in the event of a conflict of interest. So currently, our appeal of citations is regulated by California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 2630.2, which allows a respondent to have a formal administrative hearing after an informal conference if one is requested within 30 days of service of the original citation. In order to align with the board, we drafted amendments to Section 2630.2 to include language allowing a respondent to request a formal administrative hearing within 30 days of the affirmation or modification of a citation following an informal conference, as well as allowing the executive officer to appoint a designee to hold the informal conference in the event of a conflict of interest. Additionally, language was added to clarify that another informal conference cannot be requested for a citation that has been affirmed or modified following an informal conference. Attachment 2 has additional edits from the version in the packet. This item was distributed to the members as a handout and is also posted on our website under meeting materials as handout. LATC is asked to consider proposed changes in the handout for 2630.2 and recommend to the board approval of the proposed changes. I'd also like to add Tara has additional edits to the revised version that was handed out. So I'll have her walk through any additional changes.
Okay, so I'm on attachment J2. On the second page, under subsection new I, it was H, now it's going to be I. On the fourth line, it begins with waived his or her right. We need to strike his or her and insert there. That's my only additional revision.
All right, thank you for that. At this point in time, I would like to open it up for discussion with the committee. Anyone have any? All right, because I've got a few questions here. One question that I had is, what's the actual definition of an informal conference? Who's typically involved in that, and what does that involve?
Stacy, do you want to answer these questions, or do you want me to go ahead? Since you're normally the one who arranges everything, and
I can answer. Okay. So typically the informal conference is just me as the enforcement analyst, Laura as the executive officer, and then the subject of the citation. There is an option for them to have their lawyer if they want, and then in return we would have Tara.
Okay, because that's a question that I had, is whether or not during this they can have representation or subject matter experts or anybody else involved in that process.
If the case went to a subject matter expert for review and resulted in a citation, then there is also the possibility that the subject matter expert that reviewed the case could also be involved in the informal conference.
All right. And I'm assuming that this informal conference is with the California Architects Board, not with LATC. Is that correct?
Right. It's with Laura.
Right. And is that at any point in time in that process, is there LATC representation as part of those conferences?
I would be the LATC representation as the enforcement analyst that analyzed the case. And then, like I said, if the case was reviewed by a subject matter expert and it's determined that they are needed in the conference, then the subject matter expert, which is a licensed landscape architect, could also be in the meeting.
Okay. And my last question, can an informal conference be requested prior to a citation? In other words, if someone's being notified that they're in violation of something, can they request a meeting to rectify that before getting to that point?
Typically, that is not something that we do, but I'm not entirely sure if it's something that we can't do. I don't know, maybe Tara can answer that.
I would say that the individual has the opportunity to respond to questions, investigative questions from the board. In that process, they can present their evidence that they've done nothing wrong. If it gets to the point that a citation is issued, that's when the informal conference is important. And that's their opportunity to have everybody in the room or virtual room. But they have the opportunity initially, before the citation is issued, to present their evidence. So no, there's not an informal conference before a citation is issued. It's afterward, and that's in accordance with the Business and Professions Code procedure, as well as the Administrative Procedure Act.
All right. And so any appeal of that would have to wait until after the formal prosecution of the case. Is that correct?
Yes.
In other words, if they're brought up and they've been cited and they've been fined or something like that, they would have to wait until after that notification before they could appeal, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I don't have any other questions at this point. Let's see here. I will ask at this point in time, unless there's any other questions or comments from the committee members, to.
I have a question, John.
Sure.
So how does this person know that they have this option? Is that conveyed to them when the information goes out to them with a citation, or I'm just kind of curious?
Yes, they're provided information on their opportunity to request an informal conference and or an administrative hearing. They're given forms that they can fill out and send in to us.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right. I will call for a motion on the proposed regulatory amendments as revised, and ask for a second.
This is Andy, so moved.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I second.
Second.
Okay, Patricia. All right. At this point in time, I'd like to open it up to the public. If they have any questions or comments, could you open up?
All right. This is the moderator, and I have opened up the Q&A panel. So if you'd like to make a comment, please type "I would like to make a comment" and submit it to all panelists using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And we are displaying instructions for your reference. This is the moderator. I see no requests for public comment at this time. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's been closed.
All right. Any additional questions or comments from the committee before we go to a vote? Okay, hearing none, I will call for a roll call vote.
Andrew, aye. Pamela Brief,
Aye.
Susan Landry,
Aye.
Patricia Kraus,
Aye.
John Roshinsky.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, we have 5 ayes.
All right, the motion passes. Thank you very much. At this point in time, we will go to item K, discuss and possible action on University of California, Los Angeles Extension Certificate Program, self-evaluation report, and curriculum approval. And I understand that for this item, Mr. Bowden and Ms. Brief will have to recuse themselves.
Correct.
Correct.
And we will we'll bring you back into the meeting when we're done with this item. All right. Let's see.
I'm ready to present, John.
Okay, Trish. Yeah, if you want.
The LATC reviews and the board approves the landscape architecture extension program that meet specific standards within our regulations, section 2620.5, requirements for an approved extension certificate program. The committee last conducted a review of the extension program in 2013, and at that time, approval was given through December 31st of this year. So in anticipation of the upcoming expiration of that approval, the program submitted a self-evaluation report to the LATC on June 15th of this year for the 2013 through 2020 academic years. At that time, former LATC Chair Mark Prescott appointed a subcommittee consisting of LATC staff and the current LATC Chair, John Roshinsky, to review the program's SER and provide a recommendation to the LATC on the continued approval of the program. Following the initial review of the report, the subcommittee sent additional questions to the program director, Stephanie Landrian, regarding recommendations from the 2013 site review and clarification on the program's relationship with the UCLA horticulture program and the UCLA School of Architecture and Urban Design. The responses were received on October 5th, and then the subcommittee prepared a report and recommendation regarding board approval of the program. So the LATC is asking consideration of the subcommittee's recommendation, which is attached under item 2. Enclosed within that report are the supplemental questions that were sent in addition to the responses received from the program, and a recommendation to the board for approval through 2023, which is 3 years. At that time, the current section 2620.5 have been approved by the board. It's currently under review by the department. And we're hoping that by the end of that 3 years, the new language will be adopted in time for the program to implement and then be reviewed by a site review team at that time under the new language. So,
Excuse me. All right, at this point in time, Patricia or Susan, do either of you have any questions or comments?
Yeah. So I know Stephanie is here to answer questions, and I'd just like to understand a little bit more how the extension program fits into the university framework. Just kind of curious. And is that something that Stephanie can answer, or do I need to do something else in order to kind of formalize my question?
Well, seeing as she is the program director, it might be good to bring her in at this point in time to answer any particular questions that we have. So if the moderator could do that.
Hi, this is the moderator. So are we talking about Stephanie Landrigan?
Yes.
Okay, I will make her a panelist. That way she can just unmute herself at will and converse and answer your questions. So Stephanie, you've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute yourself.
All right, thank you.
Uh-huh. This is the moderator. I'll go ahead and
Okay, I
she got
figured
it.
out how to do it. Sorry.
Okay.
You know, I'm usually digitally adept, but I haven't used WebEx. Excuse me. Thank you, Trish. Patricia, I appreciate your question. UCLA Extension is part of the university, and under that connection, we get our academic senate approval through a supporting academic department. And our academic department approver is UCLA's Architecture and Urban Design, AUD department. And so we have all of our classes, curriculum, and instructors approved through the Academic Senate because we prepare our curriculum. Any real changes both have to go to you first, and then they sort of bless it so that we are still in standing with the intent of the Academic Senate to maintain academic integrity. So is there, and usually this is just done through the chairperson, and that's Heather Robolig right now. Is there something more I can add? Would you like more in-depth?
No, I was just kind of curious kind of how it fit in. And I guess the other question would be, is there any interaction like between the Department of Architecture and Urban Planning or Urban Design and the extension program?
We do have Heather come to our shows and jury our shows, so she's aware of the quality of work that we're producing. And as you all know, as professionals, our work, our deliverables are really what most people want to see and to determine if we're meeting our objectives. So she is involved that way. She's not able to be involved on our guidance committee, which is unfortunate because I would have liked that. But the problem with our academic departments is their chair positions rotate. And so they're not, so once we have a relationship with Heather, we may have another relationship with Neil or somebody else later. So we try to keep them engaged as best we can, but they are full professors and they're teaching and doing research at the same time. They do interact with us when we need jurors so that we have that connection.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
Susan, any questions or comments?
No.
All right. I know that I, obviously having worked on this quite a bit, the one thing that I would like to bring out are what are called on page 8, the observations. And these are really short of of recommendations on moving forward, given that probably within about 3 years' time, there will be another more formal review of the program once the new regulations are enacted. But a couple of the kind of key points that I thought were important to address were that given that graduates of this certificate program will be utilizing, hopefully, their experience and education in applying for a professional license here in California. And I thought it was important to point out that although it's not the primary goal of the extension program to basically train people for professional licensure, it is important to remember that potential candidates will be relying on this education and experience in order to qualify as such. And therefore, the program and the extension program in general need to keep that in mind when they're looking at supporting these programs, and specifically the landscape architecture extension program. And another point that I brought up is in reviewing the particularly the units requirement, part of which are electives, that currently all electives have to be taken within the UCLA extension umbrella. And I thought that it was important to point out that, particularly considering that we have Cal Poly Pomona nearby, we have the program at USC, as well as other venues that they might consider expanding acceptable units from those other programs or alternatives to help satisfy the electives requirement for graduation. And that would be, I guess, an internal matter with them, but it's something that will be officially included in the observations as far as that goes. So with that,
may I speak?
Sure.
Thank you. So good afternoon, Chair Roshinsky and committee members. And I thank you for this opportunity to present. And I'd also like to add a response to your question from the report on page 8. Our program does allow for review and transferring into the program up to 20 units from the core requirements. We do not transfer in any electives. And that is because one of the things, we barely have enough students to take our electives and to run them. And they are specifically, I would say, addressed as to areas we feel that our students will need improvement in, including we offer Rhino, we offer SketchUp, we offer hand sketching classes on site. So these are areas that our students may have weakness in, and we also allow several of our horticulture programs to be used as electives. Mm-hmm. The very few universities will transfer in electives from another area once they start a program. However, we do transfer in up to 20 units from any other school that has a program that has the same units and the same learning objectives. So I do that frequently, and I agree with you. It is important that we honor the other universities and the work that they've been doing. I will let you know that USC will not reciprocate, so they will not transfer in any of our classes to meet their requirement. However, Cal Poly will. So those are called articulation agreements. And so those are done between universities, and that has, those are often difficult to accomplish. I also want to thank you for your time in reviewing the SER, but I do want to say, I know I've spoken with Trish and Tara on this. It takes us about a year to get all of the material together and to prepare an SER and to respond to it. I mean, we will gather all of the information and materials. However, because we have waited 7, 8, 9 years for these regulations to be changed, and I believe that it is probably an unnecessary burden to reduce the approval process, because typically when an approval process changes, there's 1 or 2 years to bring it up to speed, to see what the new requirements are, to work with the university, which is sort of like trying to save the Titanic from sinking. So it's quite cumbersome, and that I almost feel that it's unnecessarily punitive to us for the fact that the regulations have not been approved and are not further along. But despite that, which if you would like to make a different decision on that, that would be great. But I will encourage you to approve the program as presented in the staff report. We are very interested in responding to and maintaining dialogue with you on your observations. And I want you to know we're a very strong program. The pandemic has allowed many people to take our classes from across California, and we are looking at ways to do a hybrid so that some of the Northern California students who are in our remote learning classes at the moment might be able to take our classes, also in the San Diego area, so that we can require students to be on campus maybe 1 or 2 times during the quarter, and then to remotely access information. So thank you again. I'm happy to answer any other questions, and I do hope you will approve our continued approval.
Thank you. I'm just curious, is there a particular reason why USC does not accept transfer of units from your program?
Well, I don't know if they accept transfer from very many universities. USC is probably the most expensive landscape architecture program in California. And so therefore, in a lot of ways, it is based, I think, on the difference in our focus. They are very theoretical. We call them, they do fantasy landscapes a lot of times as opposed to real practical application of landscape architecture. I hate to be, I mean, I'm not using that as a derogatory, I'm just using it as a descriptor. And so in fact, a lot of graduates of USC and Cal Poly's graduate programs come and take our practical classes so they can pass the exam. We are the only landscape architecture program that's in a graduate level that teaches irrigation and construction drawings to the extent that we do. Not that we teach to the test, but we do teach to the hope that our graduates will be able to take the exam and hang their landscape architecture license out there for business.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Trish, and maybe for Laura as well. In regards to the current recommendation, we have a date on here, tentative date on here of approval for the program through through the end of 2023. Is there anything that would prevent us from extending that date as part of this recommendation?
I'll go first. This is Trish. I think that date came up as, as Stephanie mentioned, these proposed changes have been in process for some time. We were actually hoping that they'd be in place in time for this current review. And since they weren't, we discussed having the opportunity to review the program under the new changes, allowing sufficient time for those regulations to be implemented, as well as sufficient time for the program to make those changes. And so together we identified approximately 3 years, which would be December 31st, to make that happen. So I don't think there's anything prohibiting it, but I'll ask Tara to weigh in on any other extension of that time period.
This is Tara. So the current regulation does not provide any deadline or expiration of the approval. So in some respects, the 3 years is a bit random. And I do want to point out that the rulemaking that's currently making its way through the process would provide board approval for 6 years. So unless the committee can justify the need for truncating us from 6 that it's already approved down to 3, what is the need to do a 3-year review rather than perhaps a 6, which has already been discussed and approved. Perhaps the committee should consider extending the approval deadline for longer.
Okay, yeah, because what I'm thinking here is that not knowing when the regulations are finally going to be approved, whether or not we want to basically amend this to give a time period from the date of approval of the regulation until the next review, rather than just setting a firm date and saying that it's only good until this period of time. And I guess the next question that I would have would be in regards to the new regulations, what are the significant changes that are going to occur with approval versus the old regulations?
This is Trish. I believe they were primarily in the area of the curriculum area. I'd have to get back to you on specifically what those were. I know Stephanie was part of that subcommittee, and she might be able to, add a little more information as far as what the specific requirements are. Did I miss
I
part
can
of your
also
question?
speak to that. This is Kara. I know that the proposal would add a curriculum requirement for current California statutes and regulations covering the environment, landscape architecture, and water conservation, which obviously is important. But I think one of the biggest things the regulation does is provide a whole new process for applying for board approval, what needs to be submitted for that approval, the type of report, and how the program can appeal a denial. So that the more substantive changes are process for approval rather than significant changes in the curriculum.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so then my next question would be if part of the changes is the actual process of applying for approval, is that intended to make it easier for them to pull everything together they have to and resubmit, or is it to require additional information beyond what they're currently providing, or what?
This is Trish. My recollection is that they just weren't captured in regulations at all. So I don't necessarily think that they're to make things easier. It's just so that we didn't have underground regulations in procedure manuals outlining what the programs needed to do in order to obtain approval.
Okay.
This is Tara. I'd like to add that even though it wasn't in the actual regulation, a site review has been required for many years. And I guess it was somehow crafted into a 3-day site review with discussion among the professors and students. Because there's no actual site review requirement this year, all the program needed to do was submit a self-evaluation report, which complied with the regulation. The new proposal would add a 1-day site review. So it does reduce what the programs had been having to do for approval, while maintaining appropriate consumer and student protection for approval of the program.
Okay. Do we have any idea at this point in time when the regulation might be approved, final approval and enactment?
This is Trish. Let's see. We submitted edits to legal earlier this month. In late November. And the next step would be to get budget final approval, and then it goes to Office of Administrative Law, pending any changes required from budget. So I think we have a target of early 2021 to get that over to OAL, and that process is approximately 1 year until it's adopted. Tara or Karen, feel free to add anything if I'm off on my timeline there.
I don't think you're off, and if we can get everything together and get it filed early in the year, then if the 45-day comment period doesn't have a lot of public comment involved, you could have it done, near the fall of next year. But realistically, you'll definitely have it done before January because it starts a timeline once you file the notice.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just looking at the date here and wondering if we don't want to change the date from 2023 to possibly something later than that. Any comments from either Patricia or Susan on that?
Yes. Tara already said that somewhere else it's documented that it's an additional 3 years. Am I correct on that, Tara?
Yeah, it would be for, I guess it would be roughly every 6 years that the approval would take place.
It seems like it'd be prudent to push the date back because it does seem to take, quite a bit of time going through the whole approval process and all the departments and everything.
Yeah, and given that the regulatory change isn't really having a lot to do with the actual program itself, the contents of the program and the class offerings and that type of thing, that I don't see anything in particular that would be of concern in regards to approving the program for a longer period of time than what's recommended here. It's just a question of what that date would be.
Tara, can you comment on what I said? I'm just curious. Because you already said that somewhere else a different date is documented.
Okay, so it's 3 years right now for this program. Previously, the approval kind of varied because that approval deadline or expiration is not in the regulation.
Okay.
So, but going forward in the proposed rulemaking, it's 6 years. It would expire in 6 years.
Okay.
Tara, is that 6 years from the date of the approval or 6 years from the date they start the application? John mentioned something about it making 6 years from the approval date.
Well, I was saying 6 years from the approval of the new regulation, not their application.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Okay, so the regulation states, this is the proposed reg, the board approval period is for 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
So once the regulation, we hope, goes into effect, UCLA will be in the middle probably of their current or this next approval period. So they may have to, reapply in 3 years from the date the regulation is effective. That's not going to change. But what you need to figure out right now is, do you want to recommend a 3-year approval period or something longer than that, and why?
Well, if we vote to approve as recommended a 3-year period, is there anything that prevents us 3 years from now of just extending the approval without having to go through the whole process?
Yes, if the regulation is in effect, they will have to comply with the regulation as written, which means submitting the self-evaluation report, completing the on-site review, and going through the committee and board approval process.
And what we're voting on today, this is just to approve the program for a particular period of time, irregardless of whether or not the new regulations, when that takes effect, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, what I would recommend then, maybe as a compromise, is we, given that it might not be for another year, maybe two, before the new regulation is actually enacted, that we extend or recommend approval of the program for 5 years, say through December 31st, 2025. And then that would give them at least 3, if not 4 years from the approval of the new regulations before they would have to apply for reapproval at that point. And I'm open to any discussion on that.
Can we say something like 3 years from the date of the approval of the regulations, or 4 years from the approval of the date of the regulations? So if it is pushed out and then their deadline pushes out?
I think we could do that.
I would not recommend doing that. Because right now they have provided all the information they're required to under the existing regulation. The only reason the proposed rulemaking is a question is because it's in process. We're making some changes, so potentially we want this program to comply with the changes when they become effective. But that's the future. Right now, based upon the information you have, is it appropriate to consumer and student protection to give them a 3-year approval or something longer? I think your long-term is 6 years based upon what you've already reviewed and approved with the proposed rulemaking. If it's something less than 6 years, most likely that's based on you want to make sure that this current process is still working. You're moving forward with the other rulemaking, which is separate, but I think a 5-year also lends credibility to the program itself because the board and the committee are making sure that it's properly offered, students are protected, and the students are properly prepared to perform the profession once they complete all of their licensure requirements. So I would not base it on the effective date of the rulemaking because honestly, there's really nothing to tie it to that other than it's coming.
Right.
And we want all programs going forward to comply with the new rulemaking. But today, UCLA has, from the recommendation in the packet, complied with the regulation. And I think that's all you've got right now.
Yeah, thus my recommendation, maybe to make this a little bit longer, say 5 years instead of 3, with the understanding that when the new regulations are enacted, that they clearly understand that going forward, when it comes time to reapply, it'll be under the new regulations.
Can I ask why 5, not 6?
Well, I'm not opposed to 6, but I think given that there will be some changes that they'll have to address in the interim in regards to some of their course offerings, I think going with a little bit shorter than 6 years will kind of offer them some incentive to start thinking about operating under the new regulations rather than the old ones at that point.
I have another comment for that consideration. If you think about it, I think the last time there was a site review, it was 4 years ago, and they're not getting one this year. A site review has always been required and will be required under the new rulemaking. So 4 plus 5 with this approval, that would be 9 years of no site review. So that's something to consider. You know, how much do we know about the actual campus and what's happening at the location? So that's one thing to consider. I think that's it.
So based on what you just said, should we keep it at the 3 years? Because that would make it 8 to have a site review.
Mr. Chair, when
Yes.
you all are through, may I comment?
Yes, would you like to comment now?
Yes. There is another option. So it is circumstances beyond any of our control that you can't have a site visit. And I would not put you all in harm, or students or anyone here. So what if there is the extension of longer than 3 years with the requirement that there's a site visit in 3 years?
Well, I think the site visit would be part of the review process for the recertification. And so there probably would not be a need for that to occur until that point in time.
I understand.
I wanted to get some clarification. Is the reason why we didn't have a site visit because of COVID?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
It is. I did send you all our student show invitation, which is a virtual exhibit of our work. If you haven't been able to see it or you lost that, please let me know. I'm happy to send you another link. It's up. I also am able to send you links to our capstone presentations. Of course, we've had to pivot on the dime to make this work, and I think we've done a good job, although I hope in all my heart and honesty that we get our feet back on the ground, because I can't imagine doing landscape architecture without having an intimate relationship with the earth. So that is a concern I have, although we do send students out solo. But I just would like to say that to do this is also a burden on the committee. And I remember when Susan had said, this is a lot of work, and why are we doing this? And I feel the same way. It's a lot of work on my part too, but it's a lot of work on your part. You all would have to review everything. You'd have to look at the existing, what happened before, what's different. I can assure you right now that I'm already meeting the curriculum requirements that are in the new regs, but it is a concern, I think, for the LATC administration and legal that this year there's not a site visit. And so, but that again is not something that we can accomplish. We're sort of in it's not within our control, and just I was hoping to have you have this discussion. I appreciate it, and whatever you decide, we will totally comply with. Thank you.
Right, and I would just like to add to that when I was reviewing the SER and putting together my list of questions, both for the current status of the program and also in comparison to the last site visit, which I was involved with, that I think any questions, specific questions that I had that I thought would have been addressed in the site visit itself were sent to Stephanie and the program, and they responded back satisfactorily to any questions that we would have had, I believe.
Hey,
So,
Karen, this is Trish. If I could just add a little bit regarding the site visit question that Patricia had. We had not scheduled the site visit yet. I think at that time, right around when COVID hit, would have been around the time that we would assimilated some sort of site review team and in time for a visit before the expiration and review by the committee before the end of for our last meeting, which would be this meeting, for example. But I just wanted to clarify that we had not actually established a site review of the program yet at that time. So it wasn't necessarily due to COVID.
Well,
Could you clarify that? I'm not sure what you're saying.
Patricia asked if we had set up a site review visit, and we had not set one up yet.
Well, okay,
earlier.
but I had sent you a letter requesting
Yes.
both times, and also that we had already initiated the process when COVID happened, so that.
But I think the timing of it overlapped with when that all began. So we had not quite moved forward with getting, discussions and identifying when that might be possible. It just sort of overlapped. So we didn't quite have that set up yet.
Correct. Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion, John.
all right.
Okay. I move that the LATC recommends approval to the board for the program, and that it is effective through December 31st of 2025.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay. All right. With that motion and second, I will open it up to the public at large with any questions or comments that they may have on that. So if you can open that up for public comment, please.
Thank you. This is the moderator, and I have opened up the Q&A panel. So if any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type "I would like to make a comment" using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, and we are displaying instructions for your reference. This is the moderator. I see no requests for public comment at this time. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's been closed.
All right. Before we go to a vote, or any last comments, questions from either Patricia or Susan?
So Stephanie, thank you for everything. You mentioned about sending out a link to the student presentations. Can you send that to me or Patricia or Trish, so that I can look at them?
I would be delighted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, I will call for a vote on the recommendation to approve the program for 5 years through December 31st, 2025. We'll start with Patricia.
Aye.
Susan?
Aye.
And I vote aye. The motion carries 3 votes to none with no abstentions.
Thank you very much for this dialogue and for your support.
Mm-hmm. All right. We will move on to item L, discuss and possible action. So actually at this point in time, if Andy and Pamela would like to come back into the meeting. We will discuss and possible action on our 2019-21 strategic plan objectives to research the need for continuing education for licensees through LATC, the American Society of Landscape Architects, or another organization to better protect the health, safety, and welfare of consumers. And at this point in time, I'd like to ask Trish to present this item.
Actually, Stacy's going to present this item. Stacy, are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready. So I just want to start out with saying that currently the California Architects Board was mandated by Senate Bill 1608 to require architects to complete 5 hours of continuing education on disability access requirements prior to renewal of their license. And most currently, the American Institute of Architects will pursue legislation in 2021 to require architects to obtain 5 additional hours of continuing education in zero net carbon design. So the board has continuing education, but it's not something that they necessarily chose. It was something that they were mandated to do. So in terms of LATC, I did some research, and it's enforcement actions against California licensed landscape architects for fiscal years 15-16 through 19-20 found that only 5 citations were issued to licensees, and they were for violations of the contract requirement and rules of professional conduct. 10 letters of advisements were issued to licensees through those 5 fiscal years, and they were for violations of rules of professional conduct, negligence, and contract requirements. No actions were taken against any licensee for incompetence in the practice of landscape architecture. So that's just some background information. And recently, the American Society of Landscape Architects Sierra chapter contacted LATC requesting that a discussion begin on requiring landscape architects to complete continuing education prior to renewal. So that's why we're here today to discuss this. And I did some research on other jurisdictions that do require continuing education and found that approximately 72% of jurisdictions that licensed landscape architects require continuing education. The number of hours varies between 12 and 32 hours for a biannual renewal cycle, and the majority of those boards define 1 hour as to be 50 minutes of instruction. All of those registration boards that do require continuing education require a minimum number of hours in health, safety, and welfare of the public, and those hours vary by board. It just depends. And then the remaining required hours can be comprised of other topics related to the profession. Not all of the boards require that the courses or course providers be pre-approved, but about half of them do. And to verify satisfactory of the CE requirement, several jurisdictions either conduct an audit from a random sample, or they require the licensees to submit a log of their CE course completion hours. So it's just a little background of what other jurisdictions are doing in terms of continuing education.
Stacy, I have a question. In regards to CEs that would specifically address contract matters or professional ethics, would that fall under the category of health, safety, and welfare?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. All right. At this point in time, anyone on the committee have questions for Stacy or the topic in general?
Yes. In the agenda item, it says research the need for continuing education for licensing through LATC, and then ASLA or other. If it were to go through ASLA, would you have to be a member of ASLA?
I am not sure on that. I guess that would be determined by ASLA.
Yeah, I don't believe so. I think anybody can sign up for their courses.
Okay, so I would just make the comment that to not have it through any agency that requires membership. I know being a member of ASLA does cost a couple $100. And I don't think it's fair to say you have to have continuing education to get it. You have to be a member of a separate organization. I know the architects do the ADA for 5 hours. I listed that as one of the other potential let's see, what page is that on? Sorry, it doesn't have a page number. Right after the pie chart, there's a page that says potential, or it doesn't say potential, it says continuing education providers. And I would certainly add to that list. For instance, the ADA certification, I know there's stuff through the DSA. There's also things like the stormwater pollution protection. So I would like to see us do further research on this. I think continuing education is important. I remember years ago when I sat on helping write the LA exam. At one point, we all took the exam to see what our pass rate would be, and I was really surprised how well or how not well I did, especially on more recent things and legislations. So I do support this, doing more research. And again, in summary, I think ADA is a big part of that. And then things that relate to the environment, like vegetation management, recycling, stormwater management, and then there should not be a requirement that you have to join be a member of an agency to take the classes.
I have a question for Stacy or Trish. Is LATC never had this requirement before in history? Or over the years, the requirement changed. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I'm just surprised that if the entire history is without the requirement of continuing education.
This is Trish. We have not had continuing education ever.
So how this now question for Laura. So it looks like there is inconsistency between our own board, right? Architects board require 5 hours, and then landscape committee does not require anything. So that is another things we can think about as well. Is there a need for consistency in the same board?
Yeah. There is a difference in the requirements, right? That there is not one for LATC and there is one for architects. But as I think Stacy mentioned, that the architects requirement came about because of related stakeholders outside of the board and out of the licensing population. So I don't think they thought of the same requirement maybe was necessary for landscape architects. So just the same comment I've made to the board that I'd make to LATC is that if you look to establish a requirement like this, first you would need to go to the legislature because you don't have authorization to create this on your own. And you're going to need to explain what the problem is that exists and how CE would fix it.
I know the principle.
That was kind of my question was, has something changed? Because, unofficially, I was informed that the state would not support it. So and I'm really not sure how I got that information, but I do recall it because, it is something that's discussed pretty regularly. Stacy mentioned, 72% of the other states require it, but we're not. The other interesting thing is you would think civil engineers would have some kind of learning requirements, and they have none. So, I guess I'm just wondering, from your perspective, would we have that type of support from the legislature? Or has something, just leave the question the way it is.
I don't know if you would have the support in the legislature. I think under Governor Jerry Brown, he was firmly against any new CE requirement, so they didn't try for a long time. I don't think anyone's really has a good read on what this governor would do. So, it's possible one way to broach this might be to include it in LATC's next sunset report, with the additional research that you're asking staff to do to see whether, and that would allow for maybe a greater discussion of the issue.
Mm-hmm. Andy?
Mr. Chair, just want to circle around to some of Susan's comments there, and maybe also yours, John. I believe ASLA does require you to be a member in order to take their continuing education classes. They call them CESs. So you do have to do that. But as I was looking at the list of the providers, you have ULI. I believe you have to be a member of ULI to be able to take their continuing education classes. I would have to think that American Planning Association, you'd have to be a member to take their continuing education classes. I don't think any of these people are doing this for free. But I think the important thing to recognize is that these providers, are there. So if you happen to be a member of ASLA, let's say, it's a member benefit. So if you're a member of ULI, it's a member benefit. If you don't belong to those, that's fine. There are other providers that aren't necessarily listed here that could provide continuing education courses, but it's not necessarily like you're saying, okay, well, if we're going to say that the state of California is now saying that you have to have continuing education, that you have to immediately join ASLA to be able to take advantage of that. I don't think that's the intent. The intent is that if we were to require continuing education for the benefit of protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the public, then I think that's an avenue that would need to be discussed and figured out. Okay, well, what providers, would the state recommend that that doesn't require a joining fee in order to be able to take those courses? So that's all I had.
Andy, I want to follow up a question with you. I'm surprised if the class is a fee based, how would ASLA or other organization want to charge you? They want as many participants as possible. Like I take my 5 hours almost exclusively with AIA, and you don't need to be a member. They want you to go because they charge you a full day, pretty expensive. So I'm just surprised. Are you sure that you needed to be a member to take their class?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, Tian, no, I'm not perfectly, confident that you have to be a member, but I'm pretty sure you have to be a member.
Mm-hmm.
But I could be wrong, so I don't want to put it so emphatic. But it's my understanding that in order to take advantage of some of the member services that, let's say, like ASLA offers, that you do need to be a member. So I mean, they're all member service based. So ASLA wouldn't be the one actually providing the continuing education. They would have programs that are contracted through them to provide the continuing education. I think.
Yeah,
that's fine.
I guess the point I was trying to make is, one, I would recommend doing the research, especially hearing that the state wasn't very favorable of doing it, so we would definitely have to justify. But I would just want to make sure that there is not a requirement through a specific group. As an instance, it says in the agenda item ASLA. I don't think if you do have a requirement to have continuing education, you should not have to join a member of another membership to just take a class. So there has to be options without having to join.
Mm-hmm.
That was the point I was trying to make. And especially if the state is not likely to support it, I would think that they would not support, oh yeah, well now you got to pay an extra $300 to join this group just to take this class.
Well, I think before we get to that point, some of the primary questions that we would have to look at is looking at the other states and asking why they feel compelled that they see a need for CEs, and have they done any type of analysis to identify specific areas of concern that they're seeing within their own licensees, that they're focusing on particular areas of practice or health, safety, and welfare issues. And then secondly, looking at our own situation, we've seen that on our own enforcement, it seems that contract and professional ethics seem to be an area of concern. And if we were to decide to approach the legislature to have CEs added to for our licensees, do we want to focus primarily on that particular area or what? So I think, it sounds like we can all kind of agree that there's definitely an interest in this, as there has been for quite a while. But the real question is what particular areas of practice or health, safety, and welfare do we feel there's a need to require additional updated information on?
So, John, as a part of this process, and I urge you or other members and all you and other members together, next week's CAB meeting, we will continue our conversation on this new education requirement. And where the Professional Qualification Committee will report committee meeting findings from last month. So there will be lots of information. I know you frequently attending, and maybe other members available to attend, maybe even voice your opinions as a part of the conversation.
All right, thank you.
I'd like to remind us,
John?
I would just like to remind us that the heading of this is discuss possible actions on 2019-21 strategic plan objectives. So this was an objective of ours. I would definitely support the research, specifically for the reasons that both John and Chan had mentioned, but I would take out of there specifically listing like landscape ASLA and just leave it need to research for continuing education to better protect the health, safety, and welfare of consumers.
All right, Pamela?
Is that a motion?
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with that on ASLA. I think one of my questions is that if it's implying that ASLA could potentially be the regulating body of the licensure or of the continuing education, and I don't know that ASLA actually does that. Patricia, Andy, you might know better because you are on and were on the BOT for ASLA, but I don't think that's something they do. I think it's more a state regulated and managed entity. That's my first note. And then second, I want to say that in regards to the health, safety, and welfare, which is, really our purview, I think there's several ways to look at this, and that is that the education in and of itself does make us better landscape architects, and then and out of that protects the public. In addition, I want to bring up that I think as we stand now, most anyone that is a professional that wants to strive to be the best is taking continuing education, whether it's required or not. And that's often the argument. However, where I see a differentiation that the public isn't aware of that because there's no continuing education. So the licensed person that wants to rest on their laurels and not get that education doesn't have any distinction different from my own that is constantly taking continuing education. So in that differentiation that isn't available to the public's view, there's different sort of qualifications that aren't being regulated in that. So I think forcing people to take those and then have that noted makes them better and protects the public. So that's my little 2-cent spiel, but I am interested on the whole ASLA aspect because I don't know that that's necessarily something they do.
Yeah, and I'm thinking there's probably a lot of practitioners out there that are unaware of certain changes in the regulations or contractual matters or that type of thing that it doesn't hurt to make sure that every licensee is aware of what their obligations are in regards to that.
That's true. Any of those regulations have put in force for the public health, safety, and welfare, right? So we want to make sure that they're being upheld.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to state that I agree with Susan's suggestions. I think we should focus on the continuing education, not the providers. So the sentence can be easily read as a research for the need for continuing education for licensee to better protect the health, safety, and welfare of consumers, eliminating all the things in the middle.
All right.
That was my recommendation of what you exactly just said. And I would like to follow on what Pamela said. She hasn't been on long enough to hear my little preachy story about how landscape architects have becoming a wide breadth of experience. You can get LEED certified, you can get CAP certified, you can get stormwater certified. And and next time we talk about our strategic plan objectives, I'm going to bring up again about having specialties within landscape architecture, similar to how civil engineer, electrical engineer, they're all engineers, but they then are licensed within a specialty. So I know I'm getting off topic a little bit, but for Pamela's sake, following up on what you said about having extra certification, I see this going into our strategic plan objectives later, a discussion of that.
Thank you. Thank you for updating me. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're going to hear
And it's a good point.
I'd like to make
the survey information shows how many people just do residential design. And there's a huge specialty difference between public work and residential. So I think, enough said, you guys all have heard me before.
All right. I was just going to say that if there's no further discussion, I will call for a motion. I think, is that what you're...
John,
Tricia's hands up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As we're doing this research, particularly with the idea that it's something that we need to justify, I think it might be appropriate to do a little bit of research and kind of connect with the board that regulates engineers, because they don't have any requirements currently.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, and I'm thinking also that if we do require CEs, it should probably somehow be tied in with the California supplemental exam, the particular items that we're testing for there, rather than just in general within the profession. So,
John, this is Trish. I just wanted to make a comment before the motion moves forward, because it sounds like it's going in the direction of further research. And I just request of the committee to be as specific as possible as far as what type of research they're asking staff to conduct.
Mm-hmm. One question that I have for you, Trish, I know, I think it's like roughly a year from now, we will be revisiting the strategic plan and setting tasks for the next several years after that. Would it be what we're voting on today? Would it be essentially to ensure that this becomes one of the tasks for the next strategic planning round? Or is the intention of this to direct staff to begin research immediately?
I've seen it go a couple of directions. We can, conclude this task as is. That research has been conducted. It can also reinvent itself as a new objective as research is presented and the committee is more clear about what direction they would like to go. A new objective could come out of that in actually moving forward with establishing continuing education, for example. So I don't think it's really set in stone. It's the pleasure of the committee how they would like to move forward. As far as the strategic plan reviewing of our next strategic plan. So I've discussed with you. We're kind of going to get a pulse on where we are with all of our objectives at our next meeting. That's my plan. But that is not to necessarily identify new objectives. What I intend to do is put the board on the LATC's plan ends at the end of next year. And so we will probably have our strategic planning session right after the board so that we can possibly align with some of their objectives at our first meeting in 2022.
All right. Thank you.
John, this is Laura. I have a question that might be for Tara. Does this actually need a motion if you're just asking staff to do additional research? I'm not sure if you could just provide the direction to staff without taking a vote at this point.
This does not need a motion.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. But I will call for a motion. But I think what we want to do is we want to be very clear here on exactly what we're going to be asking for. And if we're only asking for some additional research at this point in time, specifically what are we looking for in that regard? And I would comment that I think we probably want to focus at this point in time on the other states that are requiring CEs and attempting to ascertain specifically why they see a need for this, and specifically if we can start to focus in on primary areas of concern that seem to be common to all of them, and see how well that matches up with our own experience here in California.
I would support that. I think it's important to know what other states are doing. I also might put in an area of research on new regulations, say maybe in the last 5 years or upcoming ones. And then the third category of research would be how we relate to, say, civil engineer architects, because architects require them, civil engineers don't. So maybe why under that.
Right. Yeah. Just be curious to see if they have had discussions about this, the engineers.
So, John, you said you want us to make a motion?
Yes, I am calling for a motion.
Okay, so I'll make a motion that the LATC research the need for continuing education for licensees to better protect the health, safety, and welfare of consumers, with the focus on what other states are doing and why, what regulations have changed that would need to have something of expertise in them. And the third would be to focus into California of what the architects and the civil engineers are doing.
All right. I assume someone wrote that down. I'll call for a second.
I second.
Okay. With that motion and second, I will open it up to public comments. So moderator, if you can open up the public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the moderator, and I have opened up the Q&A panel. If you would like to make a comment, please type "I'd like to make a comment" and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference. And Stephanie Landrigan would like to make a comment. So Stephanie, you've been unmuted.
Thank you very much, Chair Wyszynski and committee members. I concur with Tien Fang and Member Landry on the fact that this should include universities, cities, and other providers that have experts that present on current topics. And secondly, I would like to say to Mr. Tien Fang, the reason architects have any continuing educations is that there was a lawsuit that was brought on failure to respond to the ADA community. It was not, and we weren't included in it, fortunately, landscape architects, but it is typically that a continuing education requirement is based upon a failure to perform. And as presented in the staff report, I don't see any failure to perform as an impetus to support it. However, as you, Chair Wyszynski, said, it could be based upon the CSE. So just recently we had an OA done, and that OA may indicate new areas of practice, and those new areas of practice could be considered areas that continuing education should be required of practitioners. So especially stormwater management goes through lots of different changes. The green, how many of our practitioners follow the green building code, et cetera. So there are a lot of elements and pieces of legislation that go through that introduce new skills and abilities and knowledge from our from us as landscape architects. So I don't know if you all have considered the fact that this could be a burden on staff. So when you are going to propose this, you need to figure out what the process is going to be to audit, to report. What is that cost going to be? Is there going to be additional cost for the license because there's new requirement? And it's pretty complicated. And in your request of staff to do research, I think they should research those states. New York would be one who has, practically a whole university requirement to do their continuing education. What is the staff time? What is their process? What is the new burden that's on the board? And those are very important elements to consider, because when you go to OAL with this, if it ever gets approval through the legislature, they're going to want to know, what is that economic impact going to be on the board? What is it going to be on the licensees? And is it worth it? So I totally understand. And as a university provider, I sort of was horrified to not see universities on there because I think hopefully all of you have a university education and consider it valuable, and those who teach valuable instructors. But I think it's good that you're discussing it. I don't know if you're going to find that it is something you want to implement, but I believe that you all are doing a great job of looking at it, and thank you for allowing me to make my comments.
Thank you, Stephanie. This is moderator. We have another public comment from Tracy Morgan Hollingsworth. So Tracy, you've been unmuted.
Thank you. Recently, we received a governor's executive order where he is actually going to be looking at a lot of policies that impact climate change. I think that is probably one of the most important issues that LATC should be looking at, and that is, who are the people who are actually practicing, what do you call it, grappling with climate change, with droughts, with everything else, and we're actually going to be researching at the CCASLA level with our national association. What are some of those specialty areas that, can have a positive impact on climate change? So I think that's, depending on how long this governor stays in office, that is a big priority for him. So just wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Tracy. And looks like Stephanie Landrigan might have an additional comment. So Stephanie, you have your hand up. Stephanie, did you have an additional comment? Your hand is up.
Sorry, I meant to take my hand down.
All right, all right. We've all done that. So then that is the end of public comment. Mr. Chair, would you like me to go ahead and close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, I will do so.
Based on the comments from Stephanie about the burden of staff, I would like to amend my motion to add that as the fourth area of research of what the fiscal and time impact to LATC staff. Does my seconder allow my amendment?
Yes.
Can you tell I've been in government for a while? Oh, by the way, I got reelected. Okay, so
congratulations.
Got to keep us laughing here a little.
All right. We have an amended motion and a second. If there's no further comment from the committee, I'll call for a roll call vote.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a comment.
Yes.
One of the things that I don't think that we're really looking at is the staff has already prepared a lot of information of what the other states have required.
Yes.
And we really haven't gone through any of that. And when you start reading through some of this stuff, some of the other states may require it, but it's like, oh, well, we just, you get to, here's one. Connecticut requires 24 hours biennial. Each member is obligated to exercise their own judgment to determine what constitutes a landscape architecture and landscape architecture related activities. What does that say? So, you could sit there and say, okay, well, they require continuing education. Let's check that box because they're one of the states that do. But, they're requiring it for no real reason. So I think if we're going to require it, there has to be a specific reason that we're, something that we're really trying to address. So, and I'm not saying that I'm against continuing education. I just want to make sure we're doing it for the right reasons. One of the things I have not heard, which really kind of surprised me during this whole discussion, is that MWELO, which is something that was mandated by the governor in 2015, and every landscape architect in the state is supposed to adhere to it. Yet there's not been any continuing education effort, mandated that we have to take it, but yet we're all supposed to just know it and, conform to it. Mm-hmm. So that, in my mind, would require continuing education. That would be addressing a problem. So same thing if there was, something that came up regarding climate change. If all they said, all landscape architects are required to do blah, whatever it happens to be, then continuing education is addressing a need, and that's what we should be. That's what we should be doing. We shouldn't be just saying, well, we're just leave it upon yourself to go take whatever courses you think that are landscape architecture related, like Connecticut does, and then require 24 hours. I mean, that just, if you want to get people upset, that would be a real good way of doing it. So I think there has to be a reason. It has to be rational. And whatever, if we were to say, okay, we are going to be able to implement this, let's say legislature allows us to do it, there has to be the amount of hours that would be required would have to be manageable, something that people could do, within a reasonable period of time.
Right.
So, That's all.
Yeah, I think, we're gonna have to turn to the cab on this as well, and look at how they're handling this, because I know they're specific on what areas that they require CEs in, and it's not really left to choice. And my guess is that's probably how we would run it if we ever do end up with CEs for landscape architects here.
I'd like to make a comment on Andrew's statement about being clear what it is. The motion does say it is the one item about protecting the health, safety, and welfare. So to me, that hones us down a little bit, that it's really truly based on those three: health, safety, and welfare. And Memuelo could be considered as part of that, because that goes to our health, and the climate change could be part of that as in it relates to health.
Yeah, and if I may speak, I agree with Andy on his comment about some of our research into states. I think I would like to, if we do decide as a committee that we want to look into what other states are doing, I'd like to define that a little bit better. I agree that I think some states may, their reasons, if it's Florida or somewhere, their reasons could be entirely different than ours. And I think as a state with the amazing wildfires that we've had this year, our shorelines, the increased storms and all of that, I think as a state we hold unique circumstances that broad comparison about, not to make it, with a little grain of salt here, but what are you doing? I think as a state, we need to look individually and really see, with all the catastrophic circumstances going on right now, where do we see the health, safety, and welfare that protected in this? Because really, as LATC members, that's our charge. So, if there isn't that health, safety, welfare component, then we don't have a leg to stand on, other than the fact that I think we all agree that we would like it, right? That's not going to hold any weight.
Mm-hmm. All right. I'm thinking we could go ahead and take a vote on this motion, or we could choose to withdraw the motion and move this to further discussion at the next meeting.
I will not. I don't want to withdraw my motion. I'd like to at least have us see where the votes come.
Okay. All right. If there's no further comment, I will call for a roll call vote. Yes.
Before we vote, can we ask Trish if she feels that the committee has given her and her staff enough information for her to be able to come away from this meeting with enough direction so that they know what they're going to be presenting to us at the next meeting?
Yeah, I do believe so. Thanks, Andy. Thanks for asking. There's sufficient information, I think, for us to move forward. I can definitely work with John if I need further direction before our next meeting. With that being said, and just kind of considering input from Tara and Laura earlier, if a motion is not needed and there is sufficient information for staff, I'm fine with that as well.
Yeah, the discussion has led me to think that I think we need to discuss it more before we have a motion, because there's, we are bringing up a lot of different things that I think are really relevant. Andy, especially what you said about WALO. I'm also looking at what the CAB is going to be discussing next week, and the zero net carbon design. I'd be real curious to kind of see what what the CAB's doing, and maybe at our next meeting we could be a lot more definitive on the direction that we're giving staff.
Patricia, that was part of our motion. Patricia,
yeah,
was looking at the CAB and also the engineer group.
Yeah. Okay. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'd be curious. It's happening next week. I'm going to try to attend. I'd be curious to just find out when they're going to have this on their agenda. Yeah, I just think we're going to be more successful if we kind of work with CAB, and so I'm kind of curious before we move too far ahead to get a little bit better feel for what they're proposing.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Agreed.
So does that mean you're withdrawing your second?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So then I will withdraw my motion then if I don't have a second on it. Let's just leave it up for discussion and wait till our next meeting.
Okay, and I will work with Trish to flesh this out a little bit more. All right. I am going to call a short 5-minute break before we move to the next item here.
Thank you.
We will be back at say 2:25.